All right, we got some people here. So before I go through the AMAs and whatnot, I wanted to read this bit of Paul Lafargue from his Social and Philosophical Studies, because I think it's really interesting, and I'll just read it for you, and you'll see for yourself. But it's from part 3 on his bit called "Causes of Belief in God," where he's describing the economic origins of the notions of abstract ideas in general. That all of these, the development of philosophy has been entirely driven by practical problems that the human species faces in day-to-day life. So, you get the notions of goods becoming the notion of a transcendental good, etc. But it goes like this. It might reasonably have been hoped that the extraordinary development and popularization of scientific knowledge and the demonstration of the necessary linking of natural phenomena might have established the idea that the universe, ruled by the law of necessity, was removed from the caprices of any human or superhuman will, and that consequently God became useless, since he was stripped of the multiple functions which the ignorance of the savages had laid upon him. Nevertheless, it cannot but be recognized that the belief in a God who can, at his will, overthrow the necessary order of things still persists in men of science, and that such a God is still in demand by the educated bourgeois, who ask him, as the savages do, for rain, victory, cures, etc. Even if the scientists had succeeded in creating in bourgeois circles the conviction that the phenomena of the natural world obey the law of necessity in such sort that, determined by those which precede them, they determine those which follow them, it would still have to be proved that the phenomena of the social world are also subject to the law of necessity. But the economists, the philosophers, the moralists, the historians, the sociologists, and the politicians who study human societies and who even assume to direct them have not succeeded and could not succeed in creating the conviction that social phenomena depend upon the law of necessity like natural phenomena. And it is because they have not been able to establish this conviction that the belief in God is a necessity for bourgeois brains, even the most cultivated ones. If philosophical determinism reigns in the natural sciences, it is only because the bourgeois have permitted its scientists to study freely the play of natural forces, which it has every motive to understand, since it utilizes them in the production of its wealth. But by reason of the situation that it occupies in society, it cannot grant the same liberty to its economists, philosophers, moralists, historians, sociologists, and politicians. And that is why they have not been able to introduce philosophical determinism into the sciences of the social world. The Catholic Church, for a like reason, formally forbade the free study of nature, and its social dominance had to be overthrown in order to create the natural sciences. The problem of the belief in God on the part of the bourgeoisie cannot be approached without an exact notion of the role played by this class in society. The social role of the modern bourgeoisie is not to produce wealth, but is to have it produced by wage workers, to seize upon it and distribute it among its members after having left to its manual and intellectual producers just enough for the nourishment and reproduction. The wealth taken away from the laborers forms the booty of the bourgeois class. The barbarian warriors, after the taking and sacking of a city, put the products of the pillage into a common fund, divided them into parts as equal as possible and distributed them by lot among those who had risked their lives to conquer them. The organization of society permits the bourgeoisie to seize upon wealth without any one of its members being forced to risk his life. The taking possession of this colossal booty without incurring dangers is one of the greatest marks of progress in our civilization. The wealth despoiled from the producers is not divided into equal parts to be distributed by lot. It is distributed under form of rents, incomes, dividends, interests, and industrial and commercial profits proportionally to the value of the real or personal property, that is to say, to the extent of the capital possessed by each of the bourgeois. The possession of a property, a capital, and not that of physical, intellectual, or moral qualities, is the indispensable condition for receiving a part in the distribution of the wealth. A child in swaddling clothes, as well as an adult, may have a right to its share of the wealth. A dead man possesses it so long as a living man has not yet perfected his title to his property. The distribution is not made among men, but among properties. Man is a zero. Property alone counts. A false analogy has been drawn between the Darwinian struggle, which the animals wage amongst themselves for the means of subsistence and reproduction, and that which is let loose among the bourgeois for the distribution of wealth. The qualities of strength, courage, agility, patience, ingenuity, and so on, which assure victory to the animal, constitute integral parts of his organism, while the property, which gives the bourgeois a part of the wealth which he has not produced, is not incorporated in his individuality. This property may increase or decrease and thus procure for him a larger or smaller share without its increase or diminution being occasioned by the exercise of his physical or intellectual qualities. At the very most, it might be said that trickery, intrigue, charlatanism, in a word, the lowest mental qualities, permit the bourgeois to take a part larger than that which the value of his capital authorizes him to take. In that case, he pilfers from his bourgeois brothers. If then the struggle for life can in a number of cases be a cause for progress among animals, the struggle for wealth is a cause of degeneracy for the bourgeois. The social mission of grasping the wealth produced by the wage workers makes of the bourgeoisie a parasitic class. Its members do not contribute to the creation of wealth, with the exception of a few whose number is constantly diminishing, and the labor which they furnish does not correspond to the portion of wealth which falls to them. If Christianity, after having been in the first centuries the religion of the mendicant crowds whom the state and the wealthy supported by daily distributions of food, has become that of the bourgeoisie, the parasitic class par excellence, it is because parasitism is the essence of this Christianity. Jesus, in his Sermons on the Mount, explained its character in a masterly fashion. It is there that he formulates the Our Father, the prayer which every believer must address to God to ask him for his daily bread instead of asking him for work. In order that no Christian worthy of the name may be tempted to resort to work for obtaining the necessaries of life, Christ adds, consider the birds of the air, they sow not, neither do they reap, and so on. The heavenly father of the bourgeoisie is the class of manual and intellectual wage workers. This is the God who provides for all its needs. But the bourgeoisie cannot recognize its parasitic character without at the same time signing its death warrant. So while it leaves the bridle on the neck of its men of science, that without being troubled with any dogma nor stopped by any consideration, they may give themselves up to the freest and most profound study of the forces of nature which it applies to the production of its wealth, it forbids to its economists, philosophers, moralists, historians, sociologists, and politicians the impartial study of the social world, and condemns them to the search of reasons that may serve as excuses for its phenomenal fortune. Concerned only with the returns received or to be received, they are trying to find out if by some lucky chance social wealth might not have other sources than the labor of the wage worker. And they have discovered that the labor, the economy, the method, the honesty, the knowledge, the intelligence, and so many other virtues of the bourgeois manufacturers, merchants, landed proprietors, financiers, shareholders, and income drawers contribute to its production in a manner far more efficacious than the labor of the manual and intellectual wage workers, and therefore they have the right to take the lion's share and to leave the others only the share of the beast of burden. The bourgeois hears them with a smile because they sing his praises. He even repeats these impudent assertions and calls them eternal truths. But however slender his intelligence, he cannot admit these things in his inmost soul, for he has only to look around him to perceive that those who work their life through, if they do not possess capital, are poorer than Job, and that those who possess nothing but knowledge, intelligence, economy, honesty, and who exercise these qualities must limit their ambition to their daily pittance and rarely hope for anything beyond. Then he says to himself, if the economists, the philosophers, and the politicians, with all their wit and literary training, have not been able, in spite of their conscientious search, to find more valid reasons for explaining the wealth of the bourgeoisie, it is because there is something crooked in the business, some unknown cause whose mysteries are beyond us. And unknowable of the social order plants itself before the capitalist's eyes. The capitalist, for the sake of social peace, is interested that the wage workers should believe his riches to be the fruit of his innumerable virtues. But in reality, he cares as little to know that they are the rewards of his good qualities as to know that truffles, which he eats as voraciously as the pig, are vegetables capable of cultivation. Only one thing matters to him, namely, to possess them. And what troubles him is to think that he may lose them without any fault of his own. He cannot help having this unpleasant perspective, since even in the narrow circle of his acquaintance, he has seen certain persons lose their possessions, while others became rich after having been in distress. The causes of these reverses and strokes of fortune are beyond him, as well as beyond the people who experience them. In a word, he observes a continual going and coming of wealth, the cause of which are for him within the realm of the unknowable, and he is reduced to setting down these changes of fortune to chance, to luck. It is too much to hope that the bourgeois should ever arrive at a positive notion of the phenomena of the distribution of wealth, since, in proportion as mechanical production develops, property is depersonalized and takes on the collective and impersonal form of corporations with their stocks and bonds, the titles to which are finally dragged into the whirlpool of the stock exchange. There they pass from hand to hand without the buyers and sellers having seen the property which they represent, or even knowing exactly the geographical place where it is situated. They are exchanged, lost by some and won by others, in a manner which comes so near gambling that the distinction is difficult to draw. All modern economic development tends more and more to transform capitalist society into one vast international gambling house where the bourgeois win and lose capital, thanks to unknown events which escape all foresight, all calculation, and which seem to them to depend on nothing but chance. The unknowable is enthroned in bourgeois society as in a gambling house. Gambling, which on the stock exchange is seen without disguise, has always been one of the conditions of commerce and industry. Their risks are so numerous and so unforeseen that often the enterprises which are conceived, calculated, and carried out must skillfully fail, while others undertaken lightly, in a happy go lucky fashion, succeed. These successes and failures, due to unexpected causes generally unknown and apparently arising only from chance, predispose the bourgeois to the mental attitude of the gamester. The game of the stock exchange fortifies and vivifies this mental cast. The capitalist whose fortune is invested in stocks sold on the exchange, who is ignorant of the reason for the variations of their prices and dividends, is a professional gamester. Now, the gamester, who can account for his gains or losses only as a good run or a bad run, is an eminently superstitious individual. The frequenters of gambling houses all have magical charms to compel good fortune. One mumbles a prayer to St. Anthony of Padua, or no matter what spirit from heaven. Another plays only when a certain color is won. Another holds a rabbit's foot in his left hand, and so on. The unknowable of the social order envelops the bourgeois as the unknowable of the natural order surrounded the savage. All, or nearly all, the acts of civilized life tend to develop in him the superstitious and mystical habit of assigning everything to chance, like the professional gamester. Credit, for example, without which commerce and industry are impossible, is an act of faith in chance, in the unknown, performed by him who gives the credit, since he has no positive guarantee that the one who receives the credit will be able to meet his obligations at maturity, his solvency depending upon 1,001 accidents that cannot be foreseen nor understood. Other economic phenomena instill every day into the bourgeois mind the belief in a mystical force without material support, detached from everything material. The banknote, to cite a single example, holds within itself a social force so far beyond its small material consequence that it prepares the bourgeois mind for the idea of a force which should exist independently of matter. This miserable rag of paper, which no one would stoop to pick up were it not for its magical power, gives its possessor all material things most to be desired in the civilized world: bread, meats, wine, house, land, horses, women, health, consideration, honors, and so on, the pleasures of the senses and the delights of the soul. God could do no more. Bourgeois life is woven out of mysticism. Commercial and industrial crises confront the terrified bourgeois, uncontrollable, unchecked forces of a power so irresistible that they scatter disasters as terrible as the wrath of the Christian God. When they are unchained in the civilized world, they ruin capitalists by thousands and destroy products and means of production by hundreds of millions. For a century, the economists have recorded their periodical returns without being able to advance any plausible hypothesis of their origin. The impossibility of finding their causes on Earth has suggested to certain English economists the idea of looking for them in the sun. Its spots, they say, destroying by droughts the harvests of India, might diminish its capacity for purchasing European merchandise and might determine the crises. These grave sages carry us back scientifically to the judicial astrology of the Middle Ages, which subjected the events of human societies to the conjunction of the stars and to the beliefs of savages in the action of shooting stars, comets, and eclipses of the moon upon their destinies. The economic world swarms with fathomless mysteries for the bourgeois, mysteries which the economists resign themselves to leaving unexplored. The capitalist, who, thanks to his scientists, has succeeded in domesticating natural forces, is so amazed by the incomprehensible effects of economic forces that he declares them uncontrollable, like God, and he thinks that the wisest course is to endure patiently the ills which they inflict and accept gratefully the favors which they grant. He says, like Job, "The Lord gave and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Economic forces appear to him in a phantasm as friendly and hostile spirits. The terrible and inexplicable phenomena of the social order which surround the capitalist and strike him without his knowing why or how in his industry, his commerce, his fortune, his well being, his life, are as disquieting for him as were for the savage the terrible and inexplicable phenomena of nature which excited and overheated his exuberant imagination. Anthropologists account for the primitive man's belief in witchcraft, in the soul, in spirits, and in God on the grounds of his ignorance of the natural world. The same explanation holds for the civilized man. His spiritualist ideas and his belief in God should be attributed to his ignorance of the social world, the uncertain duration of his prosperity, and the unknowable causes of his fortunes and misfortunes, predisposing the bourgeois to admit, like the savage, the existence of superior beings which act on social phenomena as their fancies lead them, whether favorably or unfavorably, as described by Theognis and the writers of the Old Testament. To propitiate them, he practices the grossest superstition, communicates with spirits from the other world, burns candles before sacred images, and prays to the Trinitarian God of the Christians or the one God of the philosophers. The savage, in daily contact with nature, is especially impressed by the unknown things of the natural order, which, on the contrary, worry the bourgeois but slightly. The only nature he knows about has been agreeably decorated, trimmed, gravelled, raked off, and generally domesticated. The numerous services that science has already rendered for his enrichment, and those he still expects from her, have engendered in his mind a blind faith in her power. He does not doubt but that some day she will solve the unknowable problems of nature and even prolong indefinitely his own life. But it is not so with the unknown things of the social world, the only ones that trouble him. These seem to him impossible of comprehension. It is the unknowable of the social world, not of the natural world, which insinuates into his unimaginative head the idea of God, an idea which he did not have the trouble of inventing but found ready to be appropriated. The incomprehensible and insoluble social problems make God so necessary that he would have invented him, had need be. The bourgeois, vexed by the bewildering go and come of fortunes and misfortunes, and by the puzzling play of economic forces, is further more confused by the brutal contradiction of his own conduct and that of his fellows with the current notions of justice, morality, honesty. He repeats these sententiously, but refrains from regulating his acts by them, although he insists that they be observed strictly by the people who come into contact with him. For example, if the merchant hands his customer goods that are damaged or adulterated, he still wishes to be paid in money. If a manufacturer cheats the laborer on the measurement of his work, he will not submit to losing a day for which he pays him. If the bourgeois patriot, all bourgeois are patriots, seizes the fatherland of a weaker nation, his commercial dogma is still the integrity of his country, which, according to Cecil Rhodes, is a vast commercial establishment. Justice, morality, and other principles, more or less eternal, are valuable for the bourgeois, but only if they serve his interests. They have a double face, an indulgent and smiling one turned toward himself, and a frowning and commanding face turned toward others. The constant and general contradiction between people's acts and their notions of justice and morality, which might be thought of a nature to disturb the idea of a just God in the bourgeois mind, rather confirms it and prepares the ground for that of the immortality of the soul, which had disappeared among nations that had reached the patriarchal period. This idea is preserved, strengthened, and constantly revivified in the bourgeois by his habit of expecting a reward for everything he does or does not do. He employs laborers, manufactures goods, buys, sells, lends money, renders any service, whatever it be, only in the hope of being rewarded, of reaping a benefit. The constant expectation of profit results in his performing no act for the pleasure in it, but to pocket a recompense. If he is generous, charitable, honorable, or even if he limits himself to not being dishonest, the satisfaction of his conscience is not enough for him. A reward is essential if he is to be satisfied and not feel that he has been duped by his good and candid feelings. If he does not receive his reward on earth, which is generally the case, he counts on getting it in heaven. Not only does he expect a reward for his good acts and his abstention from bad acts, but he hopes to receive compensation for his misfortunes, his failures, his vexations, and even his annoyances. His ego is so aggressive that to satisfy it, he annexes heaven to earth. The wrongs in civilization are so numerous and so crying, and those of which he is the victim assume in his eyes such boundless proportions, that his sense of eternal justice cannot conceive but that some day they shall be redressed. And it is only in another world that this day can shine. Only in heaven is he assured of receiving the reward for his misfortunes. Life after death becomes for him a certainty, for his good God, just and adorned with all bourgeois virtues, cannot but grant him rewards for what he has done and has not done, and amends for what he has suffered. In the business tribunal of heaven, the accounts not adjusted on earth will be audited. The bourgeois does not give the name of injustice to his monopolizing of the wealth created by wage workers. For him, this robbery is justice itself, and he cannot conceive how any imaginable God could have a different opinion on the subject. Nevertheless, he regards it as no violation of eternal justice to allow the laborers to cherish the desire to improve their conditions of life and of labor, but he is keenly aware that these improvements would have to be made at his expense. He thinks it good policy to promise them a future life where they shall feast like the bourgeois. The promise of posthumous happiness is for him the most economical way to satisfy the laborer's demands. Life beyond the grave, at first a pleasure of hope for the satisfaction of his ego, becomes an instrument of exploitation. Once it is settled that in heaven the accounts of earth are to be definitely settled, God necessarily becomes a judge having at his disposal an El Dorado for some and a prison for others, as it is laid down by Christianity following Plato. The celestial judge renders his decrees according to the judicial code of civilization, enriched by a few moral laws which cannot figure in it, owing to the impossibility of establishing the offense and finding the proof. The modern bourgeois occupies himself mainly with the rewards and compensations beyond the tomb. He takes but a moderate interest in the punishment of the wicked, that is to say, the people who have injured him personally. The Christian hell disturbs him little, first, because he is convinced that he has done nothing and he can do nothing to deserve it. And second, because his resentment against his fellows who have sinned against him is but short lived. He is always disposed to renew his relations of business or pleasure with them if he sees any advantage in it. He even has a certain esteem for those who have duped him, since after all, they have done to him only what he has done or would have liked to do to them. Every day in bourgeois society, we see how persons whose pilferings had made a scandal and who might have been thought forever lost return to the surface and achieve an honorable position. Nothing but money was demanded of them as a condition for resuming business and making honorable profits. Hell could only have been invented by men and for men tortured by the hate and the passion of vengeance. The God of the first Christians is a pitiless executioner who takes a savory pleasure in feasting his eyes on the tortures inflicted for all eternity on the infidels, his enemies. This is from Second Thessalonians. The Lord Jesus, says St. Paul, shall ascend into heaven with the angels of his power, with burning flames of fire, working vengeance against those who know not God and who obey not the gospel. They shall be punished with an everlasting punishment before the face of God, before the glory of his power. The Christian of those days expected with an equally fervent faith for the reward of his piety and the punishment of his enemies, who became the enemies of God. The bourgeois, no longer cherishing these fierce hates, hate brings no profits, no longer needs a hell to assuage his vengeance, nor an executioner God to chastise his associates who have clashed with him. The belief of the bourgeois in God and in the immortality of the soul is one of the ideological phenomena of its social environment. It will never lose it till it is dispossessed of its wealth, stolen from wage workers, and transformed from a parasitic class into a productive class. The bourgeois of the 18th century, which struggled in France to grasp the social dictatorship, attacked furiously the Catholic clergy and Christianity because they were props of the aristocracy. If in the ardor of battle some of its chiefs, Diderot, Lemaitre, Helvetius, de Holbach, pushed their irreligion to the point of atheism, others, quite as representative of its spirit, if not more so, Voltaire, Rousseau, Turgot, never arrived at the negation of God. The materialist and sensualist philosophers, Cabanis, Maine de Briand de Girondeau, who survived the revolution, publicly retracted their infidel doctrines. We must not waste our time in accusing these remarkable men of having betrayed the philosophical opinions which, at the opening of their career, had assured them fame and livelihood. The bourgeois alone is guilty. Victorious, it lost its irreligious combativeness, and like the dog in the Bible, it returned to its vomit. These philosophers underwent the influence of the social environment. Being bourgeois, they evolved with their class. The so- this social environment, from the workings of which not even the most learned nor the most emancipated of the bourgeois can free themselves, is responsible for the deism of men of genius, like Cuvier, Geoffrey St. Hilaire, Faraday, Darwin, and for the agnosticism and positivism of contemporary scientists who, not daring to deny God, abstain from concerning themselves with him. But this very act is an implicit recognition of the existence of God, whom they need in order to understand the social world, which seems to them the plaything of chance, rather than ruled by the law of necessity, like the natural world. Mr. Brunetiere, thinking to dart an epigram at the free thought of his class, quotes the phrase of German Jesuit Gruber that the unknowable is an idea of God appropriate to Freemasonry. The unknowable cannot be anyone's idea of God, but it is its generating cause in savages and barbarians, as well as in Christian bourgeois or Freemasons. if the unknown elements of the natural environments made necessary for the savage and barbarian the idea of a God, creator, and ruler of the world, the unknown elements of the social environment make necessary for the bourgeois the idea of a God who shall distribute the wealth stolen from the manual and intellectual wage workers, dispense blessings and curses, reward good deeds, avenge injuries, and repair wrongs. The savage and the bourgeois are drawn unsuspectingly into the belief in God, just as they are carried along by the rotation of the earth. Now, I think that's an interesting way of describing the differences here between um, the original conception of God, which is this God of the workers, right, in the Christianity in the first centuries, who are believing in like an imminent revolution, within their own generation to where God would, lead them in their vengeance upon the parasites of the world. Um, there is now there's this pseudo like warmed up pseudo Christian spiritual mystic woohoo bullshit, which is far more prevalent now. Like you've got like Buddhist pantheists or whatever the fuck. They've got all these like more and even closer like pagan metaphysics, the one God of the philosophers, et cetera, et cetera. They don't have a concrete conception of God. This is, I would compare instead to the conception of God that Jesus is actually describing in his own ministry, which is one in which there is a personal association where he's effectively saying, I'm actually the word of God right now. So you have to treat me personally, individually, the same because I'm the only one who understands the rules of the social world here and the necessity of the Jubilee, et cetera, et cetera. This is like Mao described. Mao Zedong said that his God was the people, and that's what Lafargue here sort of says that Jesus gives an excuse for the bourgeois, the future bourgeois, when he says, do nothing, because God will provide for you. God being the people. The people will provide for you. So I wanted to compare this one more. There's another in the next section. Lafargue goes further. I think this dialectic was more play in the late 19th century, early 20th century when Lafargue's writing. But obviously, Christianity and its specificity has become less and less popular as more of this mystic woohoo, new thought, new atheism, atheism plus, human like mystical simulation, human effective altruism, all of this sort of cultish bullshit is the real religion of the bourgeois. It still has its God, but it's certainly not the God that Jesus is even describing. It's not even the God of the Bible. It's the God of nature, the God of the machine, even, this kind of complete nonsense. But anyway, this is further on in the same work where I think Lafargue points to the future here, where we're living. So, the wage worker ought to be resigned to his lot. The social function of exploiter of labor requires the capitalist to propagate the Christian religion, preaching humility and submission to God, who chooses the masters and sets off the servants, and to complete the teachings of Christianity by the eternal principles of democracy. It is quite in his interest that the wage workers exhaust their brain power in controversies on the truths of religion and in discussions on justice, liberty, ethics, patriotism, and other such booby traps, in order that they may not have a minute to reflect on their wretched conditions and the means for improving it. The famous radical and free trader John Bright appreciated this stultifying method so thoroughly that he devoted his Sundays to reading and commenting on the Bible for his laborers. But the profession of biblical brain destroyer, which English capitalists of both sexes may undertake to kill time or as a whim, is of necessity irregular, like any amateur work. The capitalist class needs to have at its disposal professionals in brain destroying to fulfill this task. He finds them in the clergy of all cults. But every metal has its reverse side. The reading of the Bible by wage workers prevents dangers that one day some pious Rockefeller will recognize. And to meet this situation, he will organize a company for the publication of popular Bibles, expurgated of the plaints against the iniquities of the rich and of the cries of envious wrath against their scandalous good fortune. The Catholic Church, foreseeing these dangers, had provided against them by forbidding the faithful to read the Bible and by burning Wycliffe, the first to translate it into a vulgar tongue. The Catholic clergy, with its neuvaines, its pilgrimages, and its other mummeries, is of all clergies that which practices most wisely the art of brain destruction. It is also the best equipped for furnishing ignorant brothers and sisters to teach in primary schools and nuns to stand guard over women in factories. The great industrial capitalist, on account of its manifold services, sustains it politically and financially, in spite of their antipathy for its hierarchy, its rapacity, and its intrusion into family affairs. I think this is like you see this very frequently. That it's like, well, if you're going to be a Christian, you should be a Catholic, be professional about it, right? And the Pope Francis, he's a Jesuit, he's close enough to being a progressive, he's all right. They're meeting up with the Rockefellers, we're not, and they're opposed to this Christian fanaticism of the wage workers who are reading the Bible and interpreting it for themselves. But also, got to make sure you hire a bunch of cultists and things to mislead those guys as much as possible, which is why you got things like QAnon, et cetera, et cetera. It's all right there. And I feel like Lafargue is my guy, right? I love Lafargue. He was because I think he just carried on the spirit of like Marx and Engels, like after they had died. Like you can tell that he's writing in the same sort of spirit, the same sort of like satirical, long, like panoramic view of the development of mankind, such that he can point to these ironies, these dialectical inversions, where you have like so you have all these religious atheists or natural scientists, etc., in the 18th century who are opposed to Christianity purely because they're opposed to the aristocracy. So that's like the screen here is that their opposition to Christianity is really the opposition to the class that is wielding Christianity at this time. But then they develop their own Christianity, the Christianity of the bourgeois, and positivism, natural, and etc. You get the Freemasons. It's literally Lafargue describing Freemasons with their god of the unknowable, like pretty directly. You can read this in William Blake when he's talking about the deists and things like this, as opposed to like the actual Christians. Although Blake is very much opposed to the Christians of his own time too, in the same way that I might say that I am, where I don't think any of a lot of them are just pure bourgeois mystics. They're not interested in the concrete reality of Christianity and what it means in the development of the human species in general. They're only interested in it on a kind of personal psychological level, which there's some stuff to that, obviously, but you can you can be interested in anything for a personal psychological level. It's ultimately meaningless. Some people feel that way about Marvel movies, but I think it's interesting that we might be at that point where the the only people who are gonna like the Bible is like obviously now a dangerous thing, because it's complete, like if you take it seriously in the level that the first Christians did, then you're basically you get Ruby Ridge in America. You get Waco'd. Those guys were trying to read it in the spirit of in the sense of like trying to have it inform their social reality. We're like, oh, this whole society is fucking evil and corrupt, so we're gonna have a community of goods outside of this society. But obviously that's illegal. So then it locks into this sort of dialectic, right, where obviously they have to be destroyed. So that's what's happening to these types of Christians today, is that they have to be destroyed or forcefully converted to some type of professional Christianity. Why don't you just become a Catholic? Just chill out, become a Catholic. Become a Catholic. Where put the Vatican Bank money into BlackRock. Pray to good fortune. It's the fact of like the kind of gambling nature, the speculative nature of our entire credit system, where we're just governed by the caprices and whims of an extremely superstitious but powerfully scientifically capable class. That's the horrifying double bind, is that not only are they capable, for instance, of developing these technologies and media spectacles, et cetera, but they're also completely unhinged psychologically, religiously, mystically, in a way that hasn't been seen since the savagery. Like you have like these NXVIM cults, etc. These bourgeois cults, where they're into every sort of syncretic type of mysticism and Lord knows what else, cults of all sort. And at the same time, they have like massive resources at their disposal. And I think this is generally just what like something that people are alienated by for obvious reason, or are investigating in so many different ways that it sort of becomes superfluous. Like you have all these parapolitics people being like, "Look at this: the CIA, cults, Catholicism, money, gambling, corruption." It's like, yeah, that's the whole thing. Like that's all of it. Like if you keep looking at it, you're just going to find more and more of that. It's not going to teach you anything except for the fact that that's how this class operates. Um, there should be no surprise that the CIA is working with the Vatican to like, do fucking and the Freemasons, etc. Like all of these people are in the same. They have all of the same interests. So there's no reason for them not to all work together doing the same thing because they're all doing the same thing anyway. Whether it's Hollywood or it's Hollywood 2, it's all the same. Anyway, I wanted to read that. Then I saw this in Politico. Democrats champion free markets as Republicans target Wall Street. And this is really just Republicans saying that they want to regulate the massive funds like BlackRock and JP Morgan Chase to stop them from using ESG scores because they're saying that ESG isn't purely capitalist enough. And then, like, i.e., that it's not free market because it's inventing these metrics regarding like environmental, social, blah 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 blah. But the like Larry Fink, BlackRock, etc., they're saying, hey, like, why are you trying to take the government and tell us how to manage our own money? Let me find the quote here. This is Biden. This is a Joe Brandon quote. This bill would risk your retirement savings by making it illegal to consider risk factors MAGA House Republicans don't like. Your plan manager should be able to protect your hard-earned savings, whether Marjorie Taylor Greene likes it or not. So basically, he's saying like, hey, these ESG factors are made up by these capitalists in order to secure their interests over a long period of time. They're like, hey, an environmental crisis is a risk for us, so we're mitigating this risk through this sort of thing. But then, like, this is the real question here: is like, are these things like real science? Is that a real science? Like quantifying the risk of environmental effects of various industries? How is this? How is this a real science? That's the question. Um, like, so the Republicans are being like, this isn't a real science. The only real science of economics is just pure profit motive. But the actual like site of the centralization of capital in these firms like BlackRock, etc., they're saying like, no, this is like us being free market oriented, like the free, like we want to offset our risk in regards to environmental shit. And they're like their whole thing being that if you don't have what is ESG stands for, equity, etc., blah blah blah. Their whole point is that these things are make a more stable workforce, etc. They don't want risks in regards to like you say like regime change, things like that, massive strikes or worker like they're trying like this is them trying to manage their risks, which is why they invented ESGs, etc. But the Republicans, all I can say is like, hey, but but you're actually just not you're being secretly socialist because you're not making pure profit motives. And they're like, well, this is pure profit motives. We just have different ways of understanding what profit is over a long period of time than what you think it is. But it's all of them like arguing over like complete mysticism because none of them fucking know how any of this shit works. It's all just gambling. So the whole funny thing is that like if you think about BlackRock covers the spread. Like BlackRock is like the guy who goes into the casino to play roulette and he puts one chip on all the numbers. He's got a chip on red and a chip on black, and it's just like trying to play the entire spread. That's the whole point of like ETFs, etc. which they own the majority of. Um, so it's sort of like they've destroyed the game of the casino of capitalism because they are just exposed to the entire market all the time. You see what I'm saying? Like, so that kind of like that's like it seems unfair or wrong somehow to the Republicans like uh Marjorie Taylor Greene because they don't under they're thinking that investment should be done on this sort of I go to the roulette table and I pick red or black. You like pick a side and you put it on. But the way they play is they bet on both sides at the same time, and they're just minimizing their losses, holding on to all of the movement in the market so that the market as a whole, as it rises or goes down, is what they're exposed to, not to any specific thing. Um, that's like the whole part about like risk management, where it's like the best that like the these are the least gambling of the gamblers because they're the gamblers who are trying to expose themselves to the least amount of risk. Like Taleb talks about this all the time and what he does, but he falls in the same trap of like his god is literally unknowability, like the black swan event. Like that is for him like the thing that determines everything. Um, and you know, that's the god of the Freemasons is just a complete unknowability is just like the thing that's outside of knowledge, just like which i.e. just like fundamentally chance. Anyway, I was thinking about this just because it's the type of thing I think about. Yeah, I'll let other people on if anyone wants to come on and ask stuff, but I'm going to go through the questions people ask. Hull wants me to buy a DoorDash gift card. Sorry. Tiger asks, was Bacon's New Atlantis a sacrifice to build the greatest country on earth and then destroy it? No, it's not. These people don't have like the types of long-term plans that people think that they do. No, Bacon was that was like a thought experiment based off of a lot of different Renaissance utopias, and basically his New Atlantis was just a university research lab where you could have the funds and freedom to do natural science research into anything, which wasn't possible at the time. Any advice for first time parents? I don't know. Good luck. Start a new discourse. I'm trying. Would like to hear your thoughts on how you plan to manage your kids' media consumption. Um, I don't know. I don't have to deal with that right now, so I don't have too many thoughts about it. But probably just not free reign. Probably not free reign. Probably like curated. Aliens will be a hot topic today. Yeah, aliens are like the unknowable God, right? Like you know, if there's like that's like one of the other things with these types of bourgeois mysticism, where if there's these fundamentally unknowable, transcendental, but pseudo concrete, but maybe they're not concrete. Maybe they come from other dimensions and they're vibrating outside of matter. Blah blah blah. Whatever it is that makes them fundamentally unknowable is their power. So like all this alien shit is is a required belief by this class at this point. Like aliens are being invented because they need to exist in order to justify our social arrangements right now. Like how could you justify if you go like what the fuck is wrong with our society? Why are things like this? And you're like, well, listen, it's actually part of a secret. Like, where there's actually reptilians. The secretly, like, then you're like, oh, okay, then we can justify the reasons for why we have to live like this. It's because of the aliens, of course. You know, so the aliens, like, it's a very important piece of little technology here for us. Is they're making this belief in aliens and the fact that we're like being governed by aliens or whatever. Look, we have to trust the aliens' plan. Otherwise, they'll just kill us all or whatever. It's literally like that's the future for the bourgeois. We're gonna have more and more of a time where if you are making good money and you're higher up in like the science, like you're in the Jeffrey Epstein science grant community and you're doing quantum physics research or whatever, you'd be like, yeah, listen, I think it's more likely that aliens exist than there to be a god. Um, that's the new form of God is like the notion of aliens. And if you're like, I don't know, man, I just think Jesus was a carpenter heaven on earth is when we forgive everyone their debts. That will be the most ridiculous superstition. All right, continuing. Preliminary advice for reading the Bible. As with everything, you just read it and you keep reading it, and that's it. What makes fetishistic art? What does it mean for art to be fetishistic or not? I don't know. I'm sort of feeling more and more that like all art in some degree is kind of fetishistic or kind of meaningless in that regard, like, or in the sense where it's like the actual best art is just stuff that people make just for the satisfaction of having made it. Which is like why a lot of the best art was made by like these sort of aristocrats in the past who had a ton of free time and they were just bored, so they were just doing it to entertain themselves and like a small circle of friends. And that's where the best art tends to come from, is from some type of really specific need, as it like that's satisfied in the moment, like, as opposed to these types of I don't know, massive edifices of art. Like, can we really say that any of these giant Hollywood blockbusters are better than the Greek plays, which had much less effort put into them, if you think in terms of the economy around it or whatever? They were pretty lo-fi, simple stuff. I don't know, I'm more of a fan of just like autonomous art, I guess, like art that exists because people felt like making it, and so they just did, and then it's just there. Um, a lot of the art biz is now about personalities and developing a persona, a brand, etc. And there can be good stuff in that, but ultimately, it's just like serving. Uh, this is, I don't know. I think it's kind of like fundamentally idolatrous to be like, oh, like I'm building this brand, and then you're like subservient to your own brand, or like to your own image of yourself, etc. And that's how you make money. Is it's like, I don't know, being like the pharaoh of yourself. I don't know. It seems sickening to me. How to read the Old Testament in the context of the New Testament, how they read it before. I mean, there's a million ways to do that. I would say that if you read it the way that the OGs, the earliest Christians who were even writing the New Testament were understanding it, that they were understanding Jesus as the figure called the angel of the Lord or the word of the Lord in the Old Testament. And you can see sort of dialectic at play between the Lord and the angel of the Lord, things like the Book of Job, etc., where the Lord in abstract is this sort of is a force that we can't withstand. And that's why we fall from the Garden of Eden, becoming sinful, like in the sense that if like we truly approach God, we would be burnt up into a crisp because it would be so far beyond what we could handle. So you have to have the mediation of God to man, which is done through these other figures, and Jesus represents like that mediation ultimately. So it's not that, and like Jesus is something that's knowable. So it's not that you're worshiping this unknowable abstract entity like the God of the Freemasons as described in Lafargue here, but an actual human being in history who can be known. So it's like really, I think Christianity should be less about God and more about Jesus, in the sense of like, who was he? What was he doing? Like, I'm like a historical Jesus guy, historicist. And I tend to read the things in the Old Testament and the New Testament as being imaginative descriptions of a real concrete reality, as we can see like beneath it. In the same way that I don't know, I think that's true of all fiction, all literature, all poetry in the first place. That there is the surface text, like you read something like Gravity's Rainbow, it's like, oh wow, all these capers and hijinks, etc. But what it's really about is what it's referring to in the reality that we actually inhabit. All of these things are only meaningful in as much as they describe or say something about reality. The like even like oh, the science fiction stories and like fantasy, they're all like about remote concerns. It's like, no, they're all about like the world we live in right now. They're just they're just encrypted by some means or whatever. Like Lord of the Rings is not about a fucking Middle Earth somewhere else. It's literally about J.R.R. Tolkien reading old Anglo-Saxon documents and old epics, like the Eddas and things like that, and trying to come up with his understanding of like basically like the Celtic Bronze Age and things like this, and like really early periods in history, and like how all of this came to be, to give the British Empire in his time a kind of the West, a kind of myth of. So you have like the threat of communism effectively is Mordor, this type of industrializing, um, monotheistic with like the Eye of Sauron, etc., rationalizing force that is against like the nature, like the worship of nature, etc. This is what he's coming up with, is this whole theology, basically very Catholic theology for the present time, which is why like Lord of the Rings guys are like we're in the 2000s. There's like a rallying thing for the defense of Western values, etc. Like it's not about some fantasy world; it's about things in real life, and its purpose is to like draw upon your connections to those things in real life. I think that's true of every piece of fiction, every piece of art is always about more so the reality that it is contained within. I don't think there's any art that is superior in value to reality itself, or like the artistry of the real. Anyway, God's the best author, and we are only imitators. Let's see. Anything else? What I've planned for the video content? Yeah, so I'm still getting that together. But basically, I just want to do kind of like, I don't know, like around like 30-minute plus videos, doing stuff like this where I take bits and pieces from different things I've read and put them into conversation with each other, try to, I don't know, tell a little story of sorts, or make a meditation of sorts on a topic that I choose for whatever reason. I've been just working on like the aesthetics that I wanted to have, because I think, this is like brand stuff. So it's like gotta look consistent. I just wanted to have like a kind of, I don't know. You'll see when you see. I can't really explain it. The whole point of making it is because I can't do it alone in speech or just in text, but I want to make a type of a visual experience, I guess, because I just think that's the language that everyone speaks in now. If you don't have a video, like eye candy or whatever, something, some type of image to sort of make sense of what's being said, then I don't think people can even understand it anymore for the most part. Like you can't actually, like, people just want a little like TikTok explainer or video. And I think people actually have really good attention spans now for things like that. Like I remember if you told me that people would be watching like 3 hour long documentaries on like the making of fucking like the politics in a Fallout 3 or some shit, like there's a million of these, they get a lot of views. I think it's because that's just like how, like, people aren't going to read a book, but they'll sit down and watch that, because you can sort of like passively take it in. You can pay attention and not pay attention to it as you wish. People's attentions are flitting in and out, so the video kind of redirects you, keeps you watching it, while the audio is kind of the more primary thing. So I'm doing audio right now, but it would be much better if I could give you, if there was like little graphics coming up every time I said some shit. What else? Yeah, I think that's good. Someone said talk about Franny and Zoe. I don't know. I just really I love the Salinger novels were really big for me, and I still really like J.D. Salinger. I just think he was he was he was going through it, man. J.D. Salinger had a rough time. He was writing like Catcher in the Rye. He had the first chapter of it in his coat while he was at storming the beach of Normandy at D-Day, and he saw a bunch of shit. I've still been waiting for his posthumous releases. The thing I really liked about Franny and Zoe, though, is it's entirely about how the like bourgeois life is so like opposed to to anything of ultimate value, where you have like Franny, who's like having like a complete like existential crisis after reading like Christian mystical literature, about the what is it, the Wandering Pilgrim, and she has to sit through this insufferable date with her boyfriend, who's like a literary man. He's going to go work for the literary magazines, and he just keeps talking about it's like, oh yeah, Flaubert lacks a certain testicularity and things like this, just like complete nonsense, just completely like worthless, like surface level description of literature, whereas she's having this very meaningful experience with it, one that like actually like her, like for Salinger, art is good when it like ruins your life. Like where you read this thing and it's like, oh fuck, like everything I want, I've just completely ruined my life. I can't do that anymore. This has completely altered my spirit in a profound manner. Whereas that like the there this is in a time period where there's a lot of like this notion of like art is like we still have this. It's meant to like be inspirational and make you like thrive to do something great or whatever. These types of like pagan literatures that William Blake describes as in the classicists, etc., where it's like, wow, I want to be the Achilles or whatever, you know, you're gonna be a war hero, to or you know, there's a lot of that in like Ayn Rand and stuff like that. The Horatio Alger, just American pulp literature in general, is very much like power fantasies. Whereas J.D. Salinger's works are always about the emptiness of bourgeois society. That's why they were somewhat popular when translated into the Soviet Union, because they're presented in the Soviet Union as books about the decadence of the bourgeois who had like no reason to live, and you know are just like tortured by this nonsense. That's that pretty much all of J.D. Salinger stuff is about how spirituality, anything like ultimately meaningful in American society, will destroy your life if it's real. If it's like me, like, and you can tell that it's real insofar as how much it ruins your life, basically. So you have like Buddy and in the Glass family, all of them who are like eminently spiritual are like dead, like they end up getting killed or dying of their own hand from just the boredom and the hollowness of American society, and the other people having it's really like about being tortured by the other people in the class of the bourgeois who like don't have any real values of anything, but just like live in this like you know these gamblers, etc. Like imagine, for instance, you writing these beautiful Tolstoyan short stories about like being a person and its difficulty in modernity, and you're like you know you're at the upper crust of society like J.D. Salinger was, like born into the Manhattan elite for the most part, going to prep schools and things like that, and then just like having like going through World War II, all this shit, and then you come back and it's just like all these people are just like obsessed with like you know buying more things. You're like I like you've seen fucking some shit and you've gone through some shit, and you know it's like how do you readjust to that? He really didn't. He just like went, you know, he lived like a hermit for a long time. But why wouldn't he? You know, that's what I would love to do that. I wish I had enough money that I could move to the woods of Vermont and never do anything ever again. Sounds nice. And he just kept writing. That's the thing with J.D. Salinger, is that he wrote so much more beyond what we have, and they still haven't published it. And I've been waiting for this for my entire life. I remember way back in the day, I was like, I'm going to become the J.D. Salinger guy, and I'm going to do like the definitive things on J.D. Salinger once these posthumous things are released, but they still haven't been. I wonder sometimes what's in those, because he did have some intelligence connections during World War II. And he had like, he was married for a time to someone who turned out to be like a German spy. So he had like, apparently there's one of the novels he wrote, it's about like intelligence capers and things during World War II. So I wonder I wonder what it is that's keeping those from being published. I think there's also supposed to be a sequel to Catcher in the Rye. I don't know. He wrote a lot of books. It's like one of those things where got so famous off of his writing in the New Yorker, and then he disappeared, but because he had that initial bit of fame, like it's like it'll no matter whenever those come out, it'll be a splash for a little bit. People are gonna be interested in it, but I imagine he'll probably get he's been canceled a million times too, as everyone is. What few plays of Shakespeare do you think are the best? And can you vibe about it? They're all really good. That's really hard. But I really like the Henriade. Like, that's it's. I think that's become kind of cliche that like men in general really like the Henry plays, but I think the Henry plays are really good. And you got like Falstaff and Hal, and those are fun. I love those. I really enjoy. I really want to do a performance of Timon of Athens. That's one of my favorite ones because it's like the most like dark satire, like comedically, that he did because it's literally like a play he wrote when everyone DeVere wrote when when he was running out of money because he'd just been giving away so much money and like to the arts and to put on these performances and things. He was just getting parasitized by all these different people, and then he was like out of money and he was just pissed because all of his friends abandoned him as soon as he couldn't pay them anymore, etc. His like scriptorium. So this Timon of Athens is his real like it's the most interesting one on an political economic perspective. Marx actually quotes it quite a lot because in it he describes how like what everything gold can turn everything into everything. When you have gold, you can this you can buy someone's virtue, etc. Just like complete. It's like it's the most economical of all of his works in describing how money destroys all human values and transvaluates them. And that's what it's all about. Timon of Athens. Like at the end, Timon is surrounded by like syphilitic whores, and he's like get it like trying to get them to spread disease throughout his homeland. What other good? I don't know. All of the Shakespeare plays are good. That's the thing. It's the thing. You can't even choose because they're all good. They're all good for so many different reasons. And like Shakespeare's one of those things also where it's like even if you don't think it's good, like it doesn't really matter what you think because uh, you can appreciate it through how it's been appreciated by others, which doesn't even necessarily mean you have to appreciate the thing itself. But it's like if you're like, oh, I fucking hate Romeo and Juliet. It's like, yeah, it doesn't really matter whether or not you like it or not. If you think it's well written or not, it's the form of it and all of the lines in it, all of the work that has been done on it and around it, and all of its adaptations, etc. It's so ingrained itself that if you don't want to look at it or deal with it, then you're just lost to a degree. It's like if you're into literature and you won't read the Bible because you're like, yeah, I don't believe any of that stuff. It's like, okay, it doesn't really matter what you believe. It doesn't matter what you value at all. Scientifically, purely scientific fashion, um, all of this stuff is directly related to it. You can't separate them. Like if you wanted to, I don't know. I guess if you just want to like entertain people on a purely base level, you could just make pornography, and it doesn't matter whether or not you know Shakespeare or whatever. But if you're trying to make something of enduring value, then you're going to just end up stealing stuff that already has enduring value or copying it, whether or not you're aware of it. I don't really believe in creativity, is the thing. I've more been like, in the sense, like, I don't think anyone like creatively comes up with something absolutely new. It's more like, Eliot said that real artists steal. I feel like that's the truth almost entirely. Where, where it's like all creativity is kind of algorithmic anyway, like in the sense that every book is ultimately constrained by its conceit and really like what makes it good is like it following those rules, all this whole obsession where it's like, oh look, we're subverting the rules or whatever, ends up making like less satisfying work. Like if you're like watching a thing and it's like a TV show and it's like obviously building to this conclusion, and it's like so obviously building this conclusion that's been foreshadowed the entire time. And if you're like an educated auditor of this TV show, you're like, oh, this is how it's going to end. It's been forecasting this entire time. And then at the end, it goes, whoa, and it pulls it out from under you and goes, huh, see, we only made it seem like it had a form that was logical. It's going this, but actually, we did this twist, and it ends in this completely stupid way. That's like so. You actually don't want people to be creative in a way. Like a lot of the times, uh, audiences are getting pissed off because the like people are trying to be creative in stupid ways in the sense of what if we what if we what if we made James Bond just like taking like these things that are like cliche formulaic things and then being like, well, we're gonna mess with the formula. And that's what creativity is when it's like, what if we made Satan the good guy? It's like just that's that's the type of creativity you get if you're not trying essentially to just conform to patterns that you didn't make up but are just latent and in culture all around you. Um, yeah, like so I don't know. That's like my issue with enjoying things these days is that I enjoy things more for like specific decisions and less for like the total um, effect of the thing or whatever. Like there's not really well, look, okay, what am I looking forward to, I guess? Like Dune 2 or something, right? Where it's like I don't even think there's like the meaning of this story is nothing to me. I don't care about the Dune books. Obviously the Dune books are all like about America's engagement in like the Middle East in the 20th century with like spice being obviously like oil and things like that. And but none of that matters anymore. It just has been kind of like deterritorialized to being just this setting for operatic shit going on. It's like almost like a pure spectacle, which is what is appealing about it to me, is that it's completely just about its own artistry, where it's like, hey, here's like a really long shot of this cool like science fiction world that we made, and you can just look at it. I kind of like art like that, where it's just kind of like you can tell that it's just something someone wanted to make, and so then it exists, and you can look at it and be like, wow, this is cool. But I don't think art is supposed to really say anything, and because what it says is like generally contained within the rest of society anyway. Like you don't need an artist to come down and reveal to you how shit really works. Like what you want an artist to do is to make something that is unique to their own curatorial tastes. So then it's effectively like pedagogical in like teaching you how to have the type of taste that the artist has who made it. Um, so like if you look at like Villeneuve or whatever, it's like, oh, so he's drawing on like these older sci-fi and like silent epics or whatever, and then you can watch those and be like, oh yeah, that is cool. The things that are like exciting or interesting about art are generally things that it's stealing from or curating from that are other people aren't doing anything with right now. So if you have all these like Marvel talky blah 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 superhero movies, then making an old school like 1950s like taking itself seriously science fiction movie with minimal dialogue, um, then yeah, then that seems really cool in comparison. Even though it's not like doing anything new in any real way, it's not like teaching you anything. We're sort of seeing this already in like when it comes to video games, like everything in video games right now is all the old shit is just coming back. Like people are playing Team Fortress 2. All of the Call of Duty game servers are back up. Battle Bit, which is a game that could have been made in like 2008, is beating all the games that have been made recently, and it's because things got so streamlined and everyone was copying each other in direct ways that there was no distinctions, and they also became too complicated. People wanted to go back to like the simplicity of the earlier game environments, so that's what they're being given. And in comparison, it feels like something new, or like there's these design decisions, but it's actually just the absence of them. There's been like an over determinization in art when it comes to like how it's supposed to make money, which is really what's been driving it horribly. So like, look at the Marvel movie universe or whatever, right? It's like, okay, well, we can't really make one movie. We got to make a whole universe, which is like 12 movies and 7 TV shows. And so that means that like your constraints for like what you can actually do with it is determined by there's like it's bureaucratic art in that sense. Whereas what's more interesting is something like the Christopher Reeves Batman, where it's like, okay, we're going to give you this, so it's your decisions, your vision of this thing, and his tastes are just imbued in all of it. Where he's like, I like this type of thing, I like this type of thing. That's like a real artist is just someone who has is like primary. Like to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader in the sense that you're just copying things that you've already read. So if you want to write something that's interesting that a lot of people haven't read, then you have to read a lot of things that other people haven't read and then copy those things. And then it seems like you're doing something creative, but what you're really doing is you're just copying a bunch of shit that people don't notice. The same thing like that's like true with like so much musical stuff too, where it's like, oh, um, was it like there's like that type of there's like Jersey club beats are really big in rap right now because there were people who were like sort of in the Jersey club scene who did like, hey, what if we did a Jersey club song like for like Lil Uzi, and then it's like, oh, now this is like a trend and everyone's copying it. That's just how it is. It's people and there's like a meta politics around that where it's like, do you have the right to sample this thing? And they talk about culture vultures or whatever, where it's like he's not really from that scene, so he's like stealing it or whatever. Um, so it's like the best thing to do, obviously, is to steal from shit that no one can even account for. And that's how a lot of the rap sampling game worked too, where it was like they weren't clearing these samples; they were trying to sample from shit that no one would be able to, no one would notice. Um, like if you're sampling, you're making your 90s boom bap beat and you're sampling something that's on the radio, then the record executives will be like, hey, wait a minute, we can get money by suing them for sampling this without clearing it. But if you're taking it from like some defunct like Bollywood movie soundtrack 45 that you found at the bottom of a crate, then you can just sample that shit and no one will be able to call you on it. That's what's scary, I guess, or at least for me, I think, or it's like probably bad for the arts is a lot of the is just like a copyright regime and the AI uh, looking out for this. Like they're trying right now to be able to copyright art styles, which would mean that even if you drew something of your own, but in a copyrighted house style, like let's say that you were on Blender and you made your own Pixar characters and they looked like Pixar characters in the Pixar house style, that you wouldn't be able to make any money on that or do anything with it because you'd be infringing on the copyright of the style, which is a really slippery thing to conceive of as some type of property that you can collect rents on is a specific style, because then it's like if you use any triplets, are you gonna get sued by Migos? Or if you there's like I don't know, if you draw like how like if you make you write your young adult series, are you gonna get sued by J.K. Rowling because that's the style? I don't know. Or if basically it's gonna make it we're going to get even more of the type of like TV tropes sort of quote unquote creativity where things you could see like what's weird is that copyright you're actually protected when it comes to satire, which is why you get all these people who have like no uh unique takes on things like they just keep doing like satires of like Hollywood movies from like the 20th century. Like I think Dan Harmon made his whole career on that in the sense because that's all copyright protected. Like you can do a satire but you can't do an homage. So it's like you, instead of writing your own Star Wars thing, you can make a parody of Star Wars, and then you can't get sued. So that's why we get these type of like non-satirical satire, where it's really just an exhaustion of creativity. So in order to justify not having, not trying to draw upon their own like, let's, okay, we'll go to Star Wars. Perfect example. George Lucas. What is Star Wars really about? Star Wars is about the 1950s and like the and World War II. That's what it's really about. It's about like getting your cool, like being a greaser, with your like cool hot rod. And there's the evil empire, which is like the Nazis, or like sort of being described as the Soviet Union later on. Um, and then there's like the free world of the rebels, etc. And uh, it's about that. It's about watching pulp sci-fi, and pulp like World War II pilot films and bombing films, etc., and Japanese samurai movies. And it's just about George Lucas's tastes and all of his tastes all mashed together. But then you have people who grew up on Star Wars, and they are pointing to Star Wars, but they're not pointing to what Star Wars points to, which are these original things like samurai movies, etc. It's just one layer mediation to make like a really good Star Wars movie. You'd have to get to what George Lucas was inspired by, and maybe add some stuff to that. Which is why I guess some people really like the Clone Wars or whatever, because it was just like if George Lucas was a kid, he was born later, he would have been really into anime, things like that. So it's really like all creativity comes from curating a taste for a wide variety of things and putting them together in a way where it's like harder to, I guess, know where the homages are, like where you stole it all from. That's all creativity really is. Like if you're like, hey, I'm gonna make this album, and I'm gonna use this guitar, but then this amp and stuff, which I like for this sound, but I want to play it in this style that is very different from that, and I want to do this and mix this and that. And that's all it really is just like finding things that you like and putting them together, and then being like, and then if it satisfies you, then you're saying like, okay, this is satisfying to me. This might be satisfying to you, or if it's not, you might not have the same taste that I do in things. And you then are kind of sort of selling like you should have the taste that I have. And then there's like an educative aspect of it as well, which is why curation is the real art, like having an eye for things, being like, I like the look of this. And you don't even necessarily need a theory for why. If you're like, I like this color, you don't need to know why. You can just know that it's a thing that you like and have faith in your own like taste, I guess. And that's all being an artist really is being like, I'm going to do this because I like it and I think it looks cool. And if people agree or disagree, that's not really a question of art. That's a question of the marketing of art. If you make things that you like, then you're an artist. If you make things that doesn't mean you're making things that sell though. So it's like to make really big artworks like something like Star Wars or whatever, you kind of have to convince or have a similar enough taste to enough people who have money, etc., to convince them that your taste is a type of taste that would be salable on the market. So like these days, for instance, right? You're like, I'm really into like these big name rappers and like this sort of or whatever. Then you'll probably get more credit extended to you because it all comes down to credit, right? When it comes to making art, because all of it's speculative. I watched this documentary on Hollywood last week or early this week sometime where it was like early Hollywood, and they're like, this is the best business because people pay before they get the goods. Like all art in like films, things like this, video games, etc. They're purchased on credit because you can't know what you're buying. Like when you go and see a movie, like you can watch reviews or whatever to like sort of better assess for yourself whether or not you can have faith in this thing that you're buying, whether or not you place your faith in it. But like fundamentally, all art is speculative. it doesn't have any real value. Like it's completely mystical. Like the value around like an album is completely mystical. The value around, in the sense that there's it's solely speculative. If you buy a movie ticket, you don't know whether or not the movie is worth to you, by your estimation, the amount that you're going to pay for it, until you see it. And then retroactively, you can say, this was a waste of my money or this wasn't a waste of my money. And that's what most reviewing is saying, like, will this be a waste of your money or time? And it has to be on pure speculation, because there's no objective criteria for what is a good use of your free time when it comes to entertainment. Like, it's sort of retarded to even think about it. It'd be like if I was like, hey, would it be a better use of my time to learn how to snowboard or to learn how to jet ski? And it's like, it doesn't really matter. Like, it's the wrong sort of question. I mean, you can ask that question, but then all you're asking is like your own estimation of that. There's no objective criteria for which one's better. It's purely speculative. Same is true of art in general. So I don't know. I've just been feeling more like there's already so much art that exists that the real problem is, if there's a problem, it's not even like it's a real problem, but it's just if you're not working within a kind of limited set of uh, samples, you might say, influences, then the salability of it as a speculative commodity is much lower. We're just seeing a kind of more rationalization of culture in order to serve the market, which leads to its own failures, its own unsatisfaction, its kind of shittiness, I suppose. Because if you really want a good art and you want freedom in the arts and the best possible art to be made, then what you want is to give as many people free time as possible and to completely remove the profit motive and capital entirely from the realm of artistic production, so that it can flourish in freedom. Like, just because, like, why do people make music? It's because people like to make music. Making money is something you have to do so that you can keep making music. If you like making music, if you like making art, it's because you like the actual process of it and not anything that it gets you. That, like, we have this upside down notion where it's like, oh yeah, great artists are moved to make great works of art so that they can get their fortunes, and like that's the carrot on the stick. But it's really like the money is always an impediment to the art. It always makes it harder. It's never like it's never productive, in the sense where, let's say you were given this massive budget to make a movie, and then you go over budget, and so the studio steps in. They're like, okay, well, we're going to make our own decisions about this movie. Do they ever make it better? Like, has the market ever stepped in to improve artistically and artwork? It's like almost never, because they, like, the market by definition can't have like prejudicial taste or um, that type of curatorial interest. They have to outsource it. So it's like, you have David Lynch, right? If you like, David Lynch has his vision for what he wants to make, and it's according to his own taste, and things make sense according to his own views, etc. Like how he puts things together, and he puts it out there, and people appreciate it because it's so specific and singular, in the sense that it's like you'd have to be David Lynch to draw on all of these specific influences and references, etc., and obsessions. This is just like so David Lynch, and it's so unlike what other people are doing, that he has like a kind of unique place where he can make things like that, and people go, "Oh, this is his brand." It's just being weird and different from everything else. But let's say Twin Peaks: The Return is in post production, and they're like, "Oh, this went over budget, and we think it's going to be alienating people, so we're going to run this through a bunch of feedback trials from the public. Like, what do they think?" And they go, oh, this doesn't really make sense. They go, hey, you're going to have to put in a voiceover and like explain all of these things because people are confused. Uh, do you think that would improve it? Like, would that make it better? Like they did that with Blade Runner, like the original Blade Runner, where it was like, people are confused about this movie. It ends like ambiguously. It doesn't have like this thing. So we're gonna need you to edit it to like make sure that it has these sorts of things, so that people don't feel like they like wasted their money on something that's like. Anyway, if you want good art, then you need communism, because then the only people who make art are people who actually like making it and are making it for their own interests and not for any speculative purpose beyond its own production. Uh, this is like unbelievable to people who don't actually make things. Is that people like to just make things for the sake thereof? That is kind of a personally fulfilling thing, like play guitar or something, and that you can just do it and it doesn't have to be a career where you have to like make your living that way. In fact, it's like way better. The only reason why people have artistic freedoms in the first place, is just because they happen to get to a point where where they can no longer have to worry about money because they're making so much of it. That's the only. That's like the whole point of getting to that position, is so that you can then just be like, oh, finally, I like, or you like Ridley Scott or whatever. You're like, finally, I've gone through making commercials for 20 years of my life, and now I can just make whatever fucking movie I want to make. They make whatever fucking movie they want to make. Then you get pretty decent stuff. But as things are more and more rationalized in order to extract more profits, you're going to get less and less of that, because there's not money to go around to go into that, which is why a lot of like the really good or more interesting art is done on like these really shoestring budgets. Like I'm thinking of like the Interface series, which is like was like originally animated on like Microsoft Paint and posted on YouTube. Um, Way more interesting than what are most of the major animation studios are doing, but it's made by like a dude who's making it so like wasn't making money on it, had to find a way to monetize it. I don't know if he survives on it or anything, but like all of those like where you have to worry about, oh, how does this going to make money? All of those things tend to compromise the uh, the purity of the art in the first place. Where it's like if you didn't have to worry about paying your rent and all these other things, you could just make something so that it attains perfection on your own terms, and you don't have to make compromises with the market or with speculations on its value. And that's where good shit comes from. Anyway, I've been rambling. If anyone wants to come on, otherwise I'll probably drop out. All right, got some jerk. Yeah, I'm just doing that. I play guitar just for fun. I don't have any
It's
goals.
a very Holden Caulfield take.
What?
But
I mean, I was talking about
well, just
Salinger earlier, so.
oh, I missed that. But like, just the effort for authenticity in art. It's very Holden.
Yeah,
And I know you're a
Holden
logo,
Caulfield
but
did
this is the
nothing
most
wrong.
logo shit I've heard all week.
Holden Caulfield did nothing wrong. That's the other thing. Though.
No, he
He
didn't.
did nothing wrong. He was the only sane person in that whole fucking book for the most part. He's like, hey, this is all
Yeah.
fucking garbage and gross, and like everyone, it's all fake and disgusting. And my brother, he's a screenplay writer. He's a prostitute out in Hollywood. That's like how it begins.
Yeah.
He's completely
Yeah.
right. And like I think it's like what's so disturbing to me is that the way that book is taught now, and people read it, and like I don't even think it'll be taught for very much longer, is that people read it and
No.
they're like, wow, look at this spoiled brat who like thinks that he can have fucking an existential crisis because he's so privileged.
Yeah, and there's a hyper focus on his like weird kind of misogyny as well, and it like completely misses the point. I think the entire interpretation of the book really completely misses the point. But
Yeah.
it's the kind of
I'm a
thing where you
Holden
shoot John
defender.
Lennon, you know?
I'm a Holden defender for sure.
Yeah, one of the better books, honestly, that was kind of foisted on the high school curriculum while it was. I don't know if they still read it in high school or not, but
Yeah, I don't think they read anything anymore. So I don't know. Even if they did assign it, it's weird that they assigned it. Like I don't know why. That's also what makes people just want to have like a reason to hate it in the first place. Is because obviously, if you're a teenager and you're being signed this book about like how much like being a teen, it's like such a weird thing to assign because it was like a countercultural quote unquote book in the sense that it was like um, really critical of like what the value of like the inauthenticity of life in America was. It's like a very spiritual book in the sense that it's like, wow, life is like really alienating and like it's like depressing and like everyone's upset, like is just like frivolous and obsessed with money.
it's the closest thing you can do to giving high schoolers LSD, short of giving them LSD. It's like
Yeah, but they don't
it's
even need
going to
LSD because like that's like the whole
no.
point of like teenage rebellion, quote unquote, is just that you're like, hey, wait, why you have to justify the social world to me? Like, justify the social world to me right now. Why are things the way that they are? And they can't do
Yeah,
it. No, no one,
no.
no one can ever
Uh,
justify to you why things are the way that they are.
No, it's true. It's true. And as soon as you wake up to that and you go and you have to like figure out what the fuck insurance is,
Oh yeah,
or like
it's not like they're
this big,
sitting
and
there
and you're like,
explaining to
so
you.
you guys all fell for this? Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, yeah,
And the rest of your life is basically sucking that up
yeah.
because no one's going to do anything about it.
Yeah, and it's like, and if you're like still paying attention to it, then everyone just treats you like you're the asshole. It's like, listen, we all just fucking shut up and deal with it. Why won't you shut up?
Yeah, it's a hazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I really like that book. I mean, I've read it a bunch of times. It's like considered like embarrassing now to like it. It's like that's how far to be like, yeah, I think that's a really solid novel. Like, I think it's really well written. Um,
Oh no, it's
it's
really well. It's
beautiful
very well written.
and
Yeah, it's a really good
it's
book.
crushing. It's like a really like it's painful. Like I don't know. I remember being that age and reading it like a couple of times and being like, "Fuck! Like, what do you do in life? What's the like?" And then I'd be asking these questions. Everyone treats me like I'm an asshole. You know what I mean? So of course I like
Yeah.
Holden Caulfield because I'm like, "What do we all? What's the like? Can you justify the social world to me?" So much of me as a child is like me going up to adults being like, "Could you justify the social world to me? Like, why are things the way that they are?" And they just be like, you just learn to deal with it. You just learn to accept it. And it's
Yeah.
like, what if I don't
It,
want to accept it? What if I think it's bad? And they're like, that's bad. That's worse. Growing up is when you accept that things are the way that they are.
yeah, I actually hate that idiom. I think there's a certain degree that to which that's true. Like you don't grow up until you kind of learn to eat shit. But yeah, that's not. I don't know. That's not maturity.
Yeah,
There's something
I'd
missing
like to
there.
have a world where you don't have to eat shit. You can just
Yeah,
be alive. That'd be nice.
it would be
That's
nice.
like Holden at one point says, right, where he's like, he's like, back in the day they had horses, and at least a horse was human. You know, like if
Right?
you're like
Yeah.
fucking just a drifter and you with your horse, you'd be like, we at least have a friend. Like
Right. Yeah.
that he was like, everyone goes through this. Like that's like the thing. Like we have all these like everyone's like, oh, it's like we're part of this subculture of like alienated youth or whatever. It's like, yeah, everyone's been going through this for fucking ever. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually the one thing that like that does bond pretty much everybody is that no one fucking likes it when they realize it, and you go through this fucking phase. And I don't know. It's sort of being psychologized these days in a way it's just weird because it's like you said, like everybody eventually goes through this. So it's not like
Yeah, they would just put like there'd be no Catcher in the Rye now because you would have been just put on drugs.
exactly. Yeah.
So it's like we don't
Like
need this book anymore. It's like yeah, like so now it's like people read it and they're like, oh well, diagnose him with a personality disorder and give it a treatment regimen to Holden Caulfield. Maybe he should have done mindfulness exercises.
yeah. Yeah. They'd have jacked him up on Adderall or something.
Yeah, but why don't we give him some SSRI block or like or maybe he was trans. Maybe he was just having gender dysphoria and he should have taken puberty blockers.
Right. Yeah. We need to medicalize this ASAP.
Yeah.
Like, get this under a scope.
We can't justify the social world, but we can conform you to
We
it.
can. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. We can use it as a cudgel if you don't like it. What is it? What's the expression? The beatings will continue until complaining
Till
stops.
morale improves. Yes.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically all we have right now. Is like, well, you just gotta accept it. Just suck it up.
Yeah, and like you were saying a minute ago, when you're the person who doesn't accept it, you're sort of
You're
forced
scapegoating.
into a category. Yeah, you're forced
That's
into
the
a
whole point
category
of
where you're either like,
Jesus. Jesus was like, yeah, I don't
yeah,
accept this. I think this society's fucked. I think we need a revolution. And everyone was like, people were like, yo, this Jesus guy talking mad sense right now. And then they were like, we gotta kill this guy. And then
well, that's what I like. That's what I dig about your takes on debt jubilees and shit like that. Like, it's it's something that we need. I don't know, as a culture,
well,
it would be
we're like
astonishing.
a
But
slave enslaved to like the mysticism and vanity of people of like these giant babies. Like that's what you should really consider these rich people as is being like giant fucking babies who they don't actually have to like they don't actually get to like even have the privilege in some ways of understanding what the world is really like because they've insulated themselves from it. So
mm-hmm.
then like like look at Elon Musk changing the branding of Twitter or whatever. It's like such a babyish like retard 14-year-old decision, and it's just like why does he get to do that? It's like well because he owns the thing, so okay he can just do whatever he wants with it, and people are like wow this is so based and cool. This one individual has all this power. It's like yeah, if you want an individual to have that much power, they should at least have some fucking taste. This guy is tasteless.
Yeah, he does have the taste of a 15-year-old boy.
It's like such Gen
He,
Xer shit. Like even making it an X is this most Gen X bullshit ever. And Gen X is like they're like the first generation to be teenagers forever. They said that about the boomers, but the boomers eventually were like, you know what? Now we're old and we're gonna be boomers and old. But the Gen Xers are like, I'm still 22. You know.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think he's the first. Well, I don't know. I don't want to give him any kind of credit, but he's definitely the kind of guy who I feel like he knows his trolling sucks, but that's part of the troll. And it's like,
No, I just think I just think he's like a fucking midwit who desperately wants to be beloved by other midwits, like really badly. Which is why all he does is like look for like the lowest common denominator, like midwit memes and things like that. And then it's just like, wow, this is cool. Like he just wants to be popular. Like it's really kind of pathetic. It's like
yeah,
so cloying his desire for popularity. That's one thing that people don't understand about people who are genuinely popular. Like, and this is true going as far back as you can imagine, that the popular kids weren't kids who were like, I want to be popular. They just were because they didn't care about those things. And like that lack of caring is what the essence of coolness is being like, what's a cool person? A cool guy is a guy who does what he wants to do for his own reasons. Like what's
yeah.
an uncool guy? A guy who's trying to do what's cool so that they can be, perceived of as being cool, but they don't know how to do that in a natural way in the sense of like if they just did whatever they wanted to do, then it wouldn't be considered cool by a lot of people or whatever. You know what I mean? This is like
Yeah, it
what
goes back to
destroyed
that.
nerd culture because nerd culture used to
Oh
be like
fuck. Yeah.
it used to be like, hey, we don't fucking care what anyone thinks about what we're doing. We like these like weird sci-fi novels, and we like these forums that aren't popular, and we don't give a shit. We're just doing what we like to do, and we're satisfying our own tastes for our own
Well,
reasons.
yeah, that dovetails in with the authenticity stuff too, because like you said, and I grew up nerd culture, like in that sense that it was like I clearly am not going to fit in with those kids, and I don't because my interests don't align. But I'll be damned if I'm going to give up those interests. Did my thing, and so yeah, I was in that space. But then I think for me when it shifted culturally was when all these shows started doing D&D episodes.
Oh
Like,
man,
oh, Community has a D&D episode. It's like, fuck yourself. That's blackface for nerds. I'm
no,
not
no,
playing.
no. See, no, that's where you're wrong. See, Big Bang
Oh yeah.
Theory, you could say that is the case because Big Bang Theory is a show about nerd culture, written by a dude who clearly has no fucking real interest in nerd culture shit at all. Like, who's
Right.
who's like really like you got like a sitcom nerd, like a guy who likes sitcoms, writing like he's like, so I just really like sitcoms. We're gonna do a sitcom about nerds. So then it's like this sort of like voyeuristic look at nerd culture, and it's for people
Uh,
who aren't a part of nerd culture to like appreciate, be like, oh, look at these like quirky nerds doing their nerd things. But the what you're talking about, like putting the D&D in it and stuff, that's because that is the real nerds like becoming like being like, hey, what we like is popular now. We're the cool guys now, and
so that was post. So you're saying that was like post the initial sort of like co-opting of that culture, and then these guys came
it's
in
all part
to
of the
sort
same
of
thing.
like,
You're because what you're saying is like all of these shows. Well, what were they? All these shows aren't. You're talking about like NBC. You're talking about these major studios. What it really is that this nerd culture, which existed in the past and had like a lower market value, really,
mm-hmm.
than it does now, was just fully commercialized. It was like all like we're like, oh, we can just actually sell nerd culture to everyone. Um,
Yeah, they were selling that authenticity of interest that you were talking about earlier, and it's like, no, now if you do this, then you are an authentic person because you're not interested in being cool.
well,
It's
they were
like,
like,
well,
gatekeeping became
I,
bad.
yeah,
Gatekeeping became bad, right?
yeah,
Where it's
yeah,
and this was all like this is why hipster culture was destroyed too. Because hipster culture, it was like people say it was like so prideful and annoying or whatever. But the whole point of it was for you to be like, hey, listen, I actually like their early demos more than their later albums, and there's nothing you can say, and there's no commercial like realm that is going to change my relationship to like what I consider to be like the authentic good things. Like it's not going to change my taste just because it sells more units or something, right? And
right, right.
so then it became like there was like it's like a game when you're like, I think this album is the best album. Someone's like, well, I don't, and then you argue about it. It's completely pointless. There's nothing to actually be gained of this discussion. What you're really just describing is your own taste, and like the whole point of being a hipster was to develop your own taste, was to develop your own like sense of aesthetics and things and be like, I really, you know what, I actually really appreciate these black metal albums from Sweden, and there's like, and no one has even heard of them, and you have to order them like mail order or whatever. So but like this industry is like at the same time, while you're doing that, these hipsters are really just like finding a way to create a commercial zone for this stuff so that it can become eventually pop culture
Right,
and commercialized in every single way. So that happened with like rap and stuff like that too. It's like subcultural, and then it
right,
became
right.
popular culture, and
Well,
now you got like there's like no there's not really subcultures anymore. Like if there is, they exist for
no,
like
no,
as
definitely not. The
long as they can
tendrils
be
have reached every
capitalized.
slice of the pie. Like,
Yeah,
there's
like
nowhere to
you have
go.
to
And I think
you
I
have
saw
these
a take on
subcultures
Twitter
making
earlier
stuff
this
that
week where it's like
is
there's never been counterculture, which I
yeah, I
thought was
saw that.
interesting because in a general sense, like once you can recognize something as a culture, it's kind of already being sold to you.
Well, it's like if you're making it and you're putting it on the market, then you're seeking to capitalize it, and then it's like you're just going to have a bunch of speculators seeing how they can capitalize on it. So something like D&D, right? D&D was initially made by a bunch of like these nerd hobbyists, and they were like, okay, we're just doing this for ourselves, and they're like, oh, we should make this into something that other people can buy, so that we don't have to make it like bespoke for every individual person who wants it. It would spread by like word of mouth or whatever, and then they sold it as like a product, and then it became a phenomenon. Same thing with Pokemon. Like, think about Pokemon. Like, Pokemon is like considered this weird fucking by boomers. When I was a kid, they were like, "Well, Pokemon, what the hell is that? What does any of this have to do?" But they sold it to us as kids, and now we people have a taste for it, and fucking, it's like $1 billion industry. It's crazy. But that's like the real thing is developing these tastes amongst children by exposing children to them, and then that like creates impressions, and that becomes like their that becomes what they imagine things through. So that's where instead of it being like the pop culture of yesteryear, we have George Lucas watching the like Saturday morning serials of like Buck Rogers or whatever the fuck, and watching these like pulp movies in the movie theaters. Nowadays, everyone is all their cultural impressions are being mediated through internet culture. So then they make art, which is all about internet culture, or it's like the Gen Xers, for them it is all like nerd culture stuff, and that's just how things work. So if you want like really interesting things, then it's like you have to have people who are developing tastes for things that aren't exactly like timely, And that's usually when people are like, wow, this is so creative. It's really, they're just talking about someone who's drawing from a set of influences that aren't that popular or commercialized anymore. That's it. That's all it really is. Obviously, there's a fucking like, so the real skill then is like if you're someone who has really weird niche tastes or something, then if you can you can sell that to people who don't necessarily have that taste, then you've capitalized that cultural transmission, and you can get a lot of fame for that because you're like producing a new market. It's like if like roguelikes as a genre of video games were old school nerd like mud text-based shit, like really early form of internet gaming culture, where these roguelike games that were like procedurally generated, they were never big commercial products, but they've become big commercial products uh, through like marketing, almost like something like Minecraft or like The Binding of Isaac or these other things. They've been they've been marketed enough that now this thing that used to be a niche hobby platform type thing has become a massive industry. Um, but I don't know. I think that's why I think like the real creativity you see is almost always done for free. Like you get these like ROM hacks of Pokemon games. If you want to play a Pokemon game that's interesting, the last thing you should do is buy whatever Nintendo sells you. Then the first thing you should do is look into the communities of people who are really obsessed with these things and are making their own versions of them solely to satisfy their own desires. Um, like usually in the form of like ROM hacks or mods or something. That's where like the real creativity comes from. And that's what's happened with gaming in general, is that all of the innovations in genres and that have been capitalized to a ridiculous degree, if you think of something like Fortnite, came out of these niche communities of people making a product that was only for to satisfy their own interests, like PUBG, which was like a mod of like Arma, which is like already like produced from a mod of these other shooters, which was just like, hey, we want one that's like way more realistic in a tactical sense or whatever the fuck. That's really where all the creativity comes from. It comes from people satisfying their own particular desires, their own curatorial interests for free in their free time. And all of the industry around it is just looking to capitalize off of that experimentation, because it's not like they're putting money into R&D at these gaming corporations, etc. The whole point is to facilitate the culture of like people doing game jams and shit like that, like making video games on the weekend, or like these flash games, etc. This is where this is like the laboratory from which the capitalists are overseeing, and then they just run with whatever they can capitalize. It's like that's now the same thing with TikTok. Like if you want a TV show, then you should make one on TikTok, and then you'll get a deal if you get enough views. If you do like little comedy sketches on TikTok and they blow up enough, you'll probably get a deal to make a TV show or something, because this like social media is just a laboratory for people trying to make new subcultures that can be capitalized on these subcultures. But it's really just curating tastes in media. So whether or not that's like in the 2010s, you got all these people being like, "Hey, we got all these forbidden right wing authors to read, and they're super based and cool, and now we've made a whole market for it, and it's been capitalized, and it's mission accomplished." That's all that happened. That's literally all that happened. Is that like people were, and it's if you're like you're like, hey, I wanted to write science fiction like Robert Heinlein, except there's not a demand for that because the tastes of the science fiction audience have been now conforming to these new trends where you have like gender science fiction or whatever the fuck. I don't know. Anyway, so then it's like if I want to make real conservative sci-fi, then you have to make an audience for it, and like that's what a lot of social media is. And I know this because it's all I've ever done. Is I have my peculiar tastes and interests, and I am trying to put those all together. I'm not very creative. I just put together a bunch of things that I have interest in, and I just put it out there, and I have an audience, and then you guys, uh, follow the shit I've laid out or like have similar overlapping interests, and now I have a platform from which I can uh, somewhat capitalize on these interests that I have by creating a community or a demographic market for the, those wares. Anyway, um, Mecha Walter Lippmann. What can I do for you? I'm going to get off this at like 12:15, so like 10, 15 minutes left. What can I
Hey,
do for
Logo.
you? What's up?
So, I thought your Lafarge, intro was very interesting, especially the whole bourgeois mysticism part of it,
Yeah, you can see it
where it,
everywhere once you see it. Like, I don't know. Also, when I lived in San Francisco, I talked to too many people who were higher up on the food chain on the tech stack and like the rationalist community or whatever, and they're all fucking crazy theosophists with fucking insane theories on things. But they come off like so rationally. It's really wild. It's like the AI alignment people. They're like fucking totally insane. But they or like Sam Bankman-Fried, like all these people, like they get so much credit. And you were like, wouldn't these like if you were showing this to like normal people, it'd be like this guy seems insane. And it's like, yeah, well, he got billions of dollars. And then in their minds, they go, well, if he got billions of dollars, then he can't be that insane.
yeah, definitely. Like one thing I always find interesting, especially in the financial world, is like technical analysis, right? Which is just like basically like reading tea leaves, just like analyzing markets via like trends and like, oh, these are limits and this and that. And it's just like a pure mystification of like financial institutions, like risk risk portfolio. Like you said, how it's like, like the, four trusts that manage pretty much most of the, market's assets are just, they've set up the casino. So it's basically every odd has,
The
some
house
sort of like,
wins. Like
yeah,
you
yeah.
want
They
to
have the
you go
EV advantage,
the person
right?
who's not gambling in the casino is the guy who owns the casino. Like that's not gambling. That's owning the casino. So sort of like our markets, like it's this casino, but at the end of the day, it's owned by the Fed. Basically, it's owned by themselves, like the people who are like not trying to make money speculatively, but are trying to eliminate their exposure to risk as much as possible by having other people take it, which is why these stock markets exist in the first place, is that other people can take these risks and then you get you don't take any, you don't have to take any risks. Your money is assured to go up. Um, that's that's the whole point. Like if you look at it, it's like who owns
Yeah.
the stock market? The stock market is a privately owned corporation, and actually, who are the biggest shareholders in the stock market? Because every stock exchange is a corporation, which is also listed on the stock exchange.
Yeah, it's like at the end of the day, they're just basically international Fabian bookie, basically, right? Like they collect their little fee.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like the origins of the trust as an economic vehicle, were slave guilds of the Vikings, where they'd Spengler talks about like what he like our type of capitalism here in the Western Europe, like Northwestern Europe, the Germanic sphere, is based off of like Viking morality, which is like everyone throws in money for the raid, and then you get to divvy up the profits based off of how much of a stake you put down in the first place. So it's all about putting up collateral like as a bet, and then you go and fight, and then you get a share of the booty, and that's how all of these things work. Where it's like you put your money into BlackRock Vanguard ETFs, and you get a percent paid out on their loot.
Yeah, that's one thing I always find interesting because like so much of this lacks historical context, right? With like the ESG, like sort of like paranoia, right? Is like anyone who's understood like, oh, or like a Disney's gone woke, it's like, well, actually, this is how things have always been, and that there's just a new form or iteration of the exact same thing that has always existed, right?
Well, it's
Like,
like, well, basically, what the conservatives have a hard time running into is that, like, they're like, well, wait, how do we justify these changes in the social world? And it's like, well, the justification is because it makes more money. Like, that's all it is. And like, so they're like, but this isn't this, but like, go broke, go woke, like, go woke, go broke. Like, it's not even to make more money. And it's like, well, if it's not making money, then they'll probably change their mind. And it's like, you look at like Bud Light, right? And it's like, oh, so it's not making them money. So then they change their mind. So the whole thing is just determined by whether or not the thing makes money. It's like you may be like, "Hey, I don't understand. Why did they make Batman trans in the new series or whatever?" It's like, well, did it make money? Did it make more money? If it did, then they're going to keep doing it. If it didn't, then they won't. Like that's all that it is. Like, but then there's the problem of the fact that these changes in the socium are also like developed in the sense of like I was showing that I posted the other day. I think it was yesterday that the psychoanalyst who was hired by Nestle to get Japan to drink more coffee. And they were like, well, it's actually a waste of time to sell coffee to people who have never had coffee before. What we should do is we should sell coffee flavored candies to children in that society. So then 20 years down the line, they'll have a taste for the taste of coffee. They'll have cultivated that taste. And then the market will grow from there. And that's exactly what happened in the 70s. The market for coffee in Japan was almost non-existent. So Nestle started selling a bunch of coffee flavored things to the Japanese, and they were like, "Oh, this is like a new type of flavor." And children were like, "Oh, I bought this candy which is coffee flavored." Now they have a taste for coffee and they have memories of coffee, etc. So then you can sell them actual coffee on top once they've developed the taste for it, and that's sort of like what's happening with wokeness, you could say, right? Where it's like, well, these children were being educated to not have a taste or a for, let's say, narratives of queerness or whatever, which was like a subculture in the 80s or the 60s or the 70s. That would be like a subculture where like you could get into that stuff, but it wouldn't be something that you'd everyone would be exposed to at a young age. But now it's like, well, if we expose everyone to all of this diversity or whatever, then they could have a taste for all of it. So that means we can build all of these different markets. So now the market for like, let's say, cartoons with gay characters in them is way bigger because it's been introduced. So now like the market for cartoons is bigger overall because it's now there's this whole new market to capture. That's all that's happened is like we're just capitalizing as many things as possible. Like the notion that capitalism for some reason would or like this whole machine that we have would sentimentally not capitalize certain things is just absurd. Like it'll capitalize anything. Like that's the whole point. Like it doesn't have a more kind of sentiment. It is it's a medium of exchange. So it'll exchange any sentiment for money. Doesn't matter. Money doesn't care if it's being used to purchase slaves or if it's being used to go to charities. Like money is money.
yeah, well, it's just to me though, like when like the traditional like how like the quote unquote like the ethos of the especially like the 50s like of the Warren Buffetts of the era was like, all right, we're going to be scientific. We're going to analyze financial statements and like read the footnotes and like have some sort of like scientific understanding of how a business
Yeah,
operates and
but
determine
then
allocating
but then if you
income,
do
right?
that full
But like,
science, what you do is you end up being like, well, it's actually based off of psychology and consumer psychology. This is like behavioral economics, etc. So then you end up just like getting these marketing gurus, etc., where it's like, well, how do we sell? How do we get a bunch of like this is Edward Bernays in the 20s? Women aren't smoking cigarettes, and they think, and there's a whole taboo around smoking cigarettes in public as being gross. And Edward Bernays is like, well, let's do an advertising campaign where we say that smoking cigarettes for women is like a way to show that they're like feminists, right? To show that they are not attached to these that they're like fashionable, that they're cool, that they don't care what people think, etc. And that increased the women's smoking rate like exponentially, create a whole new market for these products. That's the like that's it's all about, so then like if you go like what's the real science of economics, what's like what's the real science of how we organize society, and it's like, well, it's ultimately a lot of it is based in these type of like religious taboos, etc., which is why you have to like manipulate those or change those through like campaigns to in order to affect changes in the economy, is you do changes in society.
See, this is why I always lean towards like supply side when it comes to economic issues. It's like at the end of the day, I do believe production is in control, right? Like
Yeah,
while they can't do it in a very short time frame, they can't like convince us all to like do like a particular thing. They do like have long term, well, not all long term, but like they do have like, all right, we want to make more margin on this or whatever. So they, push it along over time through media consumption and, habits and things like that, right? So,
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a ton of money going into all of this for like, and it's funny to me because it'll be like this is like described as socialism by the conservatives, right? Where it's like, wait, why are all these billionaires funding these things? It's like, well, it's because they have like a really long term view of profit. Like they're not like they're thinking in terms of impacting things for generations. So because that's where how you make the most money. Like if you're the first one to come up with a portable game console, which is initially this like niche product or whatever, then for nerds, and you're like, wait, we want everyone to buy one of these. Then when you like marketing it and changing like people's tastes in the culture such that it becomes that thing is like how you actually produce that massive amount of profit. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It's like socially constructed. And if it's socially constructed, that means that it's also like mediated, which means that you want to control the like brand image, etc. It becomes more and more mystical. It becomes more and more like this like you've invented a new god. So how do you get people to worship? Like if you're in the cult of Dionysus, before Dionysus has been incorporated into the Hellenic pantheon, um, then like but like if you initially, or it's like Christianity, right? Like the original Christians were appealed to on this level, but then as Christianity becomes bigger, in order to like fully capitalize itself on the whole thing, in order to become the faith of the Roman Empire, it's got to change the product a little bit.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I think I have a related question to this. It's like kind of like a social democracy type question because like I think this tends to be an issue and also just with like so like I really agree with Jehu when it comes to like I think the inherent nature of all production is for labor to go to zero and price to go to zero,
Yeah,
right? And I think that like Fabian democracy, social democracy kind of works to like extend this because I think that like the ruling class really thinks that this is like a serious existential problem where it's like if we don't have like something to do, we'll all just become heroin addicts and burn society to the ground.
yeah,
Like,
that'll impact profits.
well, it also impact their position in society,
Yeah,
right? Where it's like, like at the end of the day, like if we're all just strung out on heroin, who's gonna serve them, right? Like, who's gonna,
yeah,
service their capital and their estates, and like if the slaves are free, who's gonna manage my plantation? You know?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like all of like the solutions to all of these problems is like, well, it's harder for a rich man to get into heaven than for a camel to get to the eye of a needle. So it's like, well, if we want to get into heaven, maybe we need to take all the money from all the rich people. Maybe like we shouldn't have people who have that much wealth. Maybe it just shouldn't be possible. But that's, God forbid that. God forbid we go, hey, no one. What if we just made that impossible? What if we distributed resources in a manner such that we maximize the free time of everyone, as opposed to giving these colossal powers to a very small and shrinking subset of humanity? What if we gave everyone as much decision making power as possible over their own immediate circumstances? Well, that would be really bad for the 1% of the population who owns everything. And that's the whole reason why it doesn't happen. There's a whole lot of false consciousness around that, obviously, because that's the biggest threat in the world is if, because like we could all just decide that none of that goes, like if everyone woke up tomorrow and agreed on all of this, then the system would have changed overnight. So the real question is like, how do you change everyone's minds about this? And turns out it's not that easy because the the amount of mystic, like, so there's one truth. If there's one truth, then there's one truth, right? But how does that one truth get taken to be the one truth if there are infinite speculations as to what the truth might be? How do you conclusively prove this? You have to conclusively prove it in this instance because it's about an experimental change in the human socium. So you'd have to get people to extend credit to it effectively, right? Where it's like back in the day when there was a big shift to get to the 8-hour working day and things like that, people overall had faith in this in across society on all levels. But if you were to say today, advocate for the 4-hour working day or to add another day to the weekend or something, there's almost no movement for that whatsoever. Like people don't even seem to, like, even if that's something that people in general agree to be as good, there's not really a push to make that happen. So then it's like, why isn't there a push to make that happen? Well, we have all these other goals now for society. Like people are like, well, we can't do that. We need to get trans rights first or whatever.
Well, I think this is an inherent problem, though, with just in general, is where, like, how do you organize society without coercion, right? As well. So, like this is how, states arise to begin with, and like how kind of like economic development. I wouldn't say necessarily always it's like a social development, but like I do think, see, this is where I struggle. Is like I think objectively, so like economic development is leads to some sort of social development where
They're
it's
the same
like,
thing. They're the same
yeah,
thing because like the
like,
economy, like the economia, like the organization of the pasture lands, which is effectively what the nomos is and becomes like the law, etc. But what it really is, like the nomos in the original form, is determining like you've come together as this like warrior band or whatever the fuck in ancient Greece, in Attic Greece or whatever, and you're like, okay, so we control this land. How are we going to split it up? That's like the nomos, is like which families get which land in this sort of clan system. And that's how it was, that's just how societies were organized at the time. It becomes more abstracted as the economy becomes more abstracted, where it's like, okay, well, how do we run a society where we've got these people who are doing things on the pasture land, but now we have like people who have to be professional art warriors, and we have people who have to be professional administrators in the temple to coin currency and things like this. We have all these new forms of abstract labor, which are productive for everyone in the society, but it's about how do we determine the payouts from these, like what is the equitable share here. So it's like we just need to do that on our level. So it's like really, it's like you look at it like we don't have the authority to do that because the state is designed legislatively at this point for over 100 years now to eliminate this from being something we can even like come together and say, like, what if we were like, okay, we're going to come together and make a constitutional amendment where no one is allowed to have more than $1 billion. Like if you have, like, it's just impossible. We're just not going to allow that kind of wealth to exist. It's not possible. It would be struck down by the Supreme Court, obviously. So like we actually have to get to, like, that's why things are going to be a shit show here, is because there's no way for us to get to where we need to go except the hard way. We're not going, like, people are only going to figure this out by exhausting all the other possibilities. So that's why we're doing all this like crazy nonsense with the economy, is because we're going to exhaust every possibility until by necessity we have to produce communism. And that's basically what Jehu's saying too, where it's like like, you know, you've got the Democrats who are running all day, getting people to, like, they're going to take away your social, they're going to privatize Social Security unless you vote us in. And it's like, you're going to privatize Social Security no matter what, because Social Security is a system that doesn't work and it's not sustainable. And you have all these people paying into it now who are never going to get paid out from it. So the Jehu way of doing things, or, you know, aligning with the libertarians, is sort of, let's just peel off the band-aid here so we can go through the crisis of our society now, instead of having to go through it later.
Yeah, and I mean, I tend to empathize and sympathize with that position. It's just that like it's like it's easier said than done, and it's just like the other hard part too, right? Is that like I do think that like production is really, I don't know, I feel like we're ramping up in a lot of ways. I know AI and machine learning is a little overhyped, but I mean I do think that like much of our system has a lot of baked in busy work that is just basically could have been automated away a decade ago, where it's just like
Well, actually,
we
it's
kind
that
of
all the value that's been created in this boom, of like Silicon Valley, et cetera, is all value from people using it for free. Like, we are right now producing the value of Twitter or X.com or whatever the fuck this thing is now. It only has value because we're on it and using it, and we're doing that for free, right? Like, we're making this, the value of this, completely for free. We're not getting paid for it, right? So it's like, what we've actually done is we found ways to privatize the gains from what are effectively public services. So like this is effectively a public service. It's effectively just like the post office for posts, right? And so by us using it, it has value to advertisers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It has value for that reason, and that's the only reason why it's profitable, is because it doesn't pay us. So, you know, you got like Elon Musk now. He's like, well, we're going to start paying out to people who use it. But if you had a system where that worked for everything, like in these metaverse systems that they make, no one actually wants to use it because everyone's only there to make money. The only reason people are here on Twitter is because people are posting on Twitter with no other goal other than to post what they want to post. And that is capitalized elsewhere. It's the same thing with like Amazon publishing, where it's like, the reason that has value is because other people are producing that value for free.
right. And I just think that like with context of the state, right? Like I do think that like it would make what I'm just saying is like I understand like Jehu's wanting to abolish the state, but like I think it's more of an existential question where it's like, well, how fast can we do that, right? Like, and
Well, there's the question
like,
realistically, and then in theory. Pragmatically, we are not going to do it at all, because it's not going to happen, because there's far too much like ideological power and opposition to this, like in the sense of like people are so um, detached from economic realities, and like at the highest level. Like, you know, you go to U Chicago and they're teaching you fucking a complete bonkers model of economics that's completely ideological. It has no relation to material history whatsoever. Like, even its story of like the origin of markets or whatever is just demonstrably false if you go into the archaeology department or the anthropology department, etc. But these things are kept siloed at the highest levels. Um, so we're only going to learn the hard way. So realistically, what Jehu's saying doesn't matter at all. He might be completely correct, and I think he's completely correct. But pragmatically, that doesn't really matter, because pragmatically people are only in consideration of like, how do we do something right now. And so on another level, though, you could say, well, this is the only solution, so pragmatically, if we all just decided that this was the solution and we did it, then it would be solved. But then it's like, okay, well, how do we get everyone to agree to that? And now you're talking about a question of like marketing. And then it's like, okay, well, how do we market this solution to enough people? And then once you're already thinking about that, it's already implausible to the highest degree.
yeah, because like, well, like to me, the way I think it would, the only way like you like the way I think that you could try and implement something like that is like, all right, like every decade, we cut the work week 8 hours or whatever,
Yeah. So then
like,
it's like,
and
how do we get this proposal on the books? Like, how do we get this proposal to be put into law? Well, it's like, okay, well, we need people to advocate for it. It's like, okay, well, how many people? How do we get more people to advocate for it in a way where it actually has any impact? Well, it's like, okay, well, then we need to start like fielding candidates, and we need this sort of apparatus, blah blah blah. And then it's like, okay, well, what you actually need to do is like effectively create like an NGO for the promotion of this idea, whether that's a party or whatever. It's going to be a corporation, a co-op, even maybe it's just all like whatever, or it's like a volunteer forum, and blah blah blah. But no matter what, it's going to have to be organized within this system by its prevailing logic in order to unseat itself, which is like why communism worked in the way that it worked, in the sense of you had these political parties in like the dawn of their like liberalization, these parliamentary systems in like Russia, China, etc. And you had these people being like, we're going to try to use these mechanisms to sublate themselves, and that's what they did. But so it's like, okay, well, you want to make a communist party in America? All right, good luck. Like, you're competing with the Democrats and the Republicans, and those guys are really well funded, and they have the complete backing of the state, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's like, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you get these things out there. I mean, I guess you do it on the smallest possible level, and it over a long enough time, these things become more persuasive. But there's really no fast solution to any of this um, at all. And the other thing is that there's just as many people competing to defend the system or to adjust it in minute ways in order to avoid these fundamental problems. And those get far more attention, obviously. It's like, why are there these ESG scores when we could just have communism? It's like, well, because the ESG scores allow for the maintenance and the continuation of this regime property distribution. So obviously, if you're Larry Fink, you could be like, is Larry Fink going to join the Communist Party, or is he going to talk to the guys who are saying that they can solve all the problems that would solve from within the system?
Yeah, I mean that in some ways it almost seems like we have to create communism incorporated, like
Well, that's what the party was. Like, that's always what it is. But then it's like, okay, so who's going to do that? And then it's like, okay, well, we've actually already like a century into there being competing versions of communism incorporated, and all of them have excommunicated each other, et cetera, et cetera. There's no like broad base for it or anything, right? So, like, really, the question is like, how do we create this form of consciousness, I guess, and how do you organize people around it in such a way that it doesn't also like just completely destroy itself, which is what's happened with every single one of these like leftist or communist movements, even the right wing movements, like the libertarians themselves, like they just destroy their own capacity to win elections. You know what I mean? Like, they're all destroy themselves. So it's like, how do you avoid that of destroying yourself? And I don't know if that's possible right now, because it's like no matter what you do, you're gonna destroy yourself, right? Like, if you if you make your third party thing or whatever, like come election year, most people are going to be like, well, we got to pick one of the two parties, and then you become like a wrecker or whatever. And then there's like a whole like, look at what's happened to like people like Glenn Greenwald or anything like that. You step out of line for it, like you hold on to like any sort of principle. And you're not just doing this sort of game theoretical speculation on making minute improvements, marginal improvements on things in this sort of Fabian strategy, then you get excommunicated, because that's the prevailing ideology, is that we're making these small steps towards some envisioned utopia, but we're not making any big steps.
yeah, I mean it's not like it's not very short-term optimistic worldview, but like I tend to agree with you in the sense that like especially like baby boomers, right? They're too much off into the sunset to like really give a shit. Like like you can be like things are going in a downward trend, and they'll be like, well, and, they look outside their window in their nice suburb, and it's like, well, it looks good to me, I don't see any problems,
Or they're like,
So
I'm
like,
going to die. That's your problem. Like, I'm just here to maintain my retirement fund until I die. And then when I'm dead, all the medical bills will take most of that. And then, you can, and we reverse mortgage the house. So whatever. There's not really a generational project in the sense of like Trent, like looking towards the future of humanity in general. There's very much like a presentist orientation. The only and then like people in general are extremely skeptical of these long-term projects because they're mostly helmed by these institutions like BlackRock, et cetera. Like those are the only people here that are looking long term. In China, they have the Chinese Communist Party, and the Chinese Communist Party's job is to basically be the BlackRock of China, where they're like, hey, we're trying to like develop this civilization for like the next 1,000 years. So like, how are we gonna like incrementally, like step by step, implement our view for the next 1,000 years? There's not really a 1,000 year plan in America, or like a 5 year plan. Even there's a business quarter plan. Like we need to just kick the football, in this play. Like it's very present oriented. So when it tries to incorporate these long term issues, it can't do so in a way that is cohesive or organized across society because it's done in competition. So you got these ESG people or whatever the fuck, but they can't be like, hey, we need to radically change. Like their whole thing's like nudging. Like it all has to be done by like voluntary compliance by means of controlling the environment around which people make decisions. So they're like, hey, if we have like I don't know, what do they say? Cows are contributing too much to climate change because people eat too much beef and there's too much demand for it. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that the prices for that go to a point where it's like exorbitant. We need to like start socially engineering replacements for that and make the like sort of more hip, so that you have a bunch of kids who are like, I don't even want cows, I just want to eat vegan because that's the new social form that we're in, or whatever the fuck. That's what's going on now. Is they're trying to plan the subjectivity for the systems that they want to implement in the future, and they do that on this long term view. But there's not really a populist reaction to that is just as organized. It's all fragmentary, and so then it ends up defeating itself by infighting, while all of these billionaires are actually colluding together. There's more class consciousness amongst the rich than there is amongst everyone else.
yeah, I totally agree. I have one last question for you, Logo.
For sure.
One thing I find your comments on the social, like on the service industry and like services typically in general, is just so spot on. And like I have yet to hear any sort of like coherent or cohesive, like even pushback, like even anything that like I haven't heard like anything on Twitter or anything from anyone like that even is like coherent, and yet people talk like you're insane, like you're gone off the deep end or whatever. Like I have yet to hear one
Yeah. Well, the thing is
serious
what's really
argument.
fucked is that it's like you got these people working like bullshit jobs that shouldn't even fucking exist, and all they can think of is like, well, I should make more money doing this bullshit job that shouldn't even exist. Why should I make more money doing that so that I can spend more of my free time trying to capitalize upon one of my interests? Like I'm making a comic book, or I have a web series, or whatever, and then it's really I just need this more. I need to make more money so that I can invest more into like this project, which will then make me rich. None of them want to be a fucking barista. Like we're doing barista discourse. Nobody wants to be a barista for the rest of their life. Nobody, absolutely fucking nobody. And if they did, what they would really want to do is they'd really want to like own their own little coffee shop, etc., which is very different from like being just an employee at Starbucks or whatever the fuck. So it's like when I'm like, hey, listen, what you actually want is to not have to do any of that at all, and you don't want to have a job at all, and you just want to work on the thing that you want to work on, right? So like, why don't you just try to develop that? And they're like, well, realistically I have to pay my bills, and this is how I pay my bills, so I'm going to defend my class interest. And it's like, well, okay, fair enough, but it's the same. They're literally slaves. Like it's literally the same thing as slavery. Like working in the service industry, the petty bourgeois. These are the house slaves. Like that's it. And if you're like, hey, you like slavery's bad, they'll be like, yeah, it's bad for the field slaves, but not me. Like I just need to make more money doing what I'm doing, and this is fine. It's fucked, man, but it makes sense. Like I like people have such a reaction to it because they're not thinking about it scientifically or like materially or even historically. They're just thinking in terms of their own self-interest, not as a class but as a particular individual. And they're like, listen, um, like these are the same people where if their individual interests changed, then their entire politics would change, right? Where it's like if they were like, if you're there, you got these baristas and they're like, yeah, we want like universal health care, blah 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 blah. I want this, I want that. But if let's say they became a billionaire tomorrow, like their SoundCloud really blew up and they're making millions of dollars, all of a sudden their opinions on things might start to change.
Yeah, one last thing, because this just ties into something. So, like, I grew up in a Republican household. My parents were like Reagan Republicans, um, like up until about 2008. Like they were a Mitt Romney, like they were non-religious, like center right business type focused people. And once Sarah Palin became the VP, they basically viewed the Republican Party as like two white trash, and then became Democrats.
Yep, many such
And
cases.
and they're now like hardcore like neoliberal MSNBC watching. Like my dad was when I grew up, my dad listened to Rush Limbaugh on the radio, and it's just like so funny to me that like very few people have really noticed this sort of like suburban trend where it's just like like all the like 90s era Republicans are all now Democrats. It's just like I can't believe it, you know.
Well, it happened the other way too, where all of this got rehabilitated on that side. Because I'm from like my parents are Democrats, like hardcore Democrats, and they were like anti-Bush. But then, as soon as Trump gets in, they're like, Bush was at least, Bush was a good guy, like he really cared, and he wasn't so crude or whatever. It's yeah. This has happened like all across. There's like, if anything, the the whole era of Trump has only given the establishment more power than it had. Like it's completely organized. Like what used to be like the upper middle class, like people like computer scientists, etc., who are like more business science oriented in that sense. They're like trying to being like, oh, I think like what happened with JFK, that was weird. Like I don't believe this thing, or it's like, oh, they lied about the WMDs, etc. Like people who are like trying to be informed, right? They used to also try to be informed by not reading the mainstream press and trying to find like expertise in the alternative media space, etc. Being like, oh, these people obviously lie to you, so we're reading real journalism, etc. Um, all of that has been turned against itself, where now the biggest thing that people are worried about in that sphere, like these educated classes, etc., is the alternative media is now the enemy, right? Where when it like that's why we're all Russian bots or whatever. Where this is all Russian disinformation, and they're like, or this is all fake. Then the conspiracy, and it's like vulgar and like not intellectual, and it's not respectable, et cetera, et cetera. That happened, and I don't know if anyone's really been able to deal with that yet, in the sense of culturally. I've only seen that get stronger, where it's like you look at there's like a kind of countercultural now push to be the most conformist, as opposed to the like now, if you like, so for instance, if you're like at a punk bar now, like this subculture where it used to be like, oh yeah, fuck the man, fuck the police, etc., or whatever. Now they're the ones who are going to be the most stringent when it comes to you observing the norms of the bourgeois. Ironically, I remember in San Francisco, the only place I was ever checked for my Vax card was the punk bar. It was like where
like they'd have like black flag stickers and shit, and they'd be the ones who were like the most fascistic about it, which is why I see this as like the real fascism is on the what's called the nominative left here, is because those like they're fully on board like with you know the dark Brandon regime or whatever. It doesn't really matter what they say. Like they fully you know, that's the irony people point out is like, well, I thought you guys were rebellious, but why do you agree with every single bank when it comes to like flying the rainbow flag and Pride Month or whatever? Um, I don't know, they don't see it. It's like it's because all of this history is so fucking opaque that if you talk about it, people assume that you're like Alex Jones conspiracy theory style shit, even though all of this is just like material economic history, where it's like, okay, what about the Fabian Society, and like let's look at how the demographics of socialism in America as opposed to like the populist movements at the same time. In fact, if you go back, I was reading Marx. um, he's talking about the problems with the American socialists and the American communists way back in like the 1870s, where you had these like radical feminists, like suffragists, etc., who were just trying to turn the Communist Party in America, the Internationale, etc., into a vehicle for their own like bohemian political prospects. There's this woman, I think her name was Woodhull, Victoria Woodhull, who Marx was like trying to like kick her out of the party because she was she like out of the Internationale, because she was just trying to take it over like with like a putsch on the inside in order to implement their like social engineering projects basically. And this is this is what happened with like Anglophone socialism, is that in the Anglo context, the only people who were interested in socialism were like these intellectuals, right? Whereas like the vast majority of people, when they organized to do things that were like socialism, they did it under these things like the Populist Party, and they were like farmers, or like, you know, looking at trying to like, you know, just like do it. Like that's the whole point of communism, is that like the industrial working class, the working class that actually produces surplus value, whatever they're doing in their own self-interest as a class, is what the essence of all of this is. It's not directed from on high by these intellectuals who are guiding society or whatever. It's like an imminent contradiction in the world. So that's why, like, when we say, like, look, well, the MAGA people, like, that's actually like a sign of like the coming communist revolt against the powers that be. Well, it's not described as such. And like what people think of communism is like these elite scientists, etc., who are like really well educated and know who Hegel is and can tell you about have actually read Marx, etc. That's what's considered to be socialism, is just the rule by intellectual civil society in the form of experts. It's just expert, and that's really what technocracy is. And that's really the like what it's like technocratic socialism is the conception of it here, and it's really just eugenics. It really all comes down to the eugenics movement, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, you start talking about like there's too much context. It's like an overwhelming amount of context. Um, it's people accept it when they're on that level. Like if I was saying all of this to a guy who does a roofer or a fucking electrician or a fucking plumber or something, they'd understand what I'm saying, because this is all they spend their time researching anyway. Like, you know, they're listening to the fucking alt radio shit and the conspiracy theory stuff, etc. Because this is what it's trying to explain, is like why are things organized the way that they are instead of otherwise. Then you have to know the history of why things are organized as they are. I don't know. So I don't know. It's just it's like a really slow movement, like tectonic plates when you're talking about the changes in culture. So I don't know. All I'm trying to do, I guess, the only thing I can think of to do is to try to make more convincing descriptions of this history. But at the same time, like if it's actually convincing, then it's also going to like piss off a bunch of people who aren't seeing their class interests reflected in it. Like if you're if I'm saying like, yeah, we should automate all of these things so that they don't exist, then you know the people who would lose their jobs immediately, they feel threatened by that, as opposed to thinking like, well, maybe I don't have to define myself by this job or my relation to the economic order right now. I don't know. That's it's ultimately like just brings on a lot of persecution on myself for doing this. I'm trying to just I'm trying to be principled and describe what I think reality actually is after my own investigations, and in doing so, I'm obviously pissing off a bunch of people who just want reality to conform to their theory as opposed to conforming their theory to how reality actually is. So for them, the working class is just anyone who has a job and who they relate to. So, you could be a working class prostitute. It doesn't matter. They say people on OnlyFans are working class, or like everyone's working class. And then they have no real theoretical basis for determining like where people actually are in the economy, or like who's producing value, who's not, whose value is being parasitized, who's not. They don't have any objective criteria for this. They don't even claim to have it anymore. It's like all just aesthetics. And so then it just comes down to these aesthetic tribes, which is all just cults and like religious mysticism. That's why the transgender thing is so fucking big, is because it's a cult that can organize across classes, which is what all that the system ever wants, is a means of coordinating actions across class interests into a type of corporate interest. And this ideology works perfectly for that. It used to work for Christianity, and that's like why a lot of the conservatives are all weirded out by shit, is because it used to be that the ideology that organized all these classes was a type of like almost Freemasonic attachment to natural law and things like that. But now the natural law is considered to be the kind of endless plasticity of things, that everything can be changed into anything else by the means of like the magic of science and whatnot. So that's the organizing ideology of today. It's not Christianity like it was when the Reagan Republicans and things like that were in power. Now Christianity is like on the outs, unless you're a Catholic. Catholics are always going to be acceptable. Are these more institutional forms of like bourgeois and aristocratic Christianity? Any type of proletarian consciousness, especially the type that's in the Bible, is extremely vulgar and is extremely dangerous, right? Dangerous, because it threatens the stability of this corporate, technocratic, eugenic empire that is seeking to colonize the entire world. I mean, that's why we're going to war with Russia and China, is because, the hope is that we can just like break them up and then fucking liquidate them, incorporate them into this management, and that'll give a bunch of white collar jobs to people in the United States to manage that extraction. I don't know. That's how it looks to me, but I got to get off because I was supposed to get off like 20 minutes ago. So have a good one, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Logo.